Chapter 7. Jen. Even though I slept in pretty late, Thomas was still sound asleep when I finally got up. I left as quietly as I could so I wouldn't wake him, which was impossible considering he was a vampire, but if I disturbed him, I couldn't tell. Rack hopped off the bed and padded silently out behind me into the hall. T.S.'s door was closed, but I could hear him snoring softly as I tiptoed down the stairs, satisfied that everyone was back home safely. I made some coffee and helped myself to a bowl of cereal while it brewed. After getting a mug, I settled down on the couch in the living room and fooled around on my phone for a few minutes before turning my attention to the huge stack of papers on the coffee table. Just before I could grab my first file, I got a text from Mariana to let me know she was about to leave for lunch and would be heading over after that. Right after I replied, I heard the stairs creak and turned to see Thomas coming down.
"Good morning,"
he said. "Morning."
"What's with all the paper?"
"Grab yourself a cup of coffee and I'll explain everything." He raised a curious eyebrow at me, but did as I suggested. Soon, the two of us were sitting on the couch together. Thomas listened, quickly forgetting all about his coffee, as I explained everything John asked us to do and about all of the files and information we had found so far.
"Wow,"
he said when I was done.
"Wow, that's disturbing."
"Yeah." He looked at my piles.
"So these are all the altered ones that Ember printed off?"
I nodded.
"Find anything?"
"I haven't had a chance to go through them yet. We left not long after she printed them."
"You want some help?"
He grinned sheepishly.
"I am sort of a fast reader."
I laughed, but accepted his offer. I liked to think that I was a fairly fast reader in my own right, but couldn't possibly keep up with the speed of a vampire. Thomas picked up the file and looked at it.
"All of the changes are in red?"
"Yeah," I said. "The first file is what's on the front end, and anything red in the second file was deleted or altered."
"Sounds good."
I only just started looking at mine when Thomas muttered,
"That's funny."
He flipped through his several more times, so quickly I could hardly see the pages move.
"The only thing that got changed in this file is that they deleted the vacation record. How weird."
"Why does Mez keep track of that anyway?" I asked. I had taken several calls, which were just people letting me know that they would be on vacation and the dates. Then I was supposed to add them to the database, even if they didn't work for Mez.
"You'd know what Charlie's job entails, right?"
Thomas asked. I nodded. Charlie's job involved working with all of the local businesses that served magics in some way. He helped them design plans and procedures, both to prevent non-magics from finding out about us and what to do in the event that there was a secrecy breach. But I didn't see what that had to do with vacations. "Yeah, I do," I said.
"Usually he just works with one or two representatives from each company, but if there is a secrecy breach, he has to speak with everyone involved. And if it ends up being something that may have been happening over a longer period of time, he needs to know which employees were there. If any of them were on vacation at the time..." He shrugged. "I think there are a handful of other things it's used for, including my job. Sometimes I get that automated email we were talking about to notify me that someone isn't feeding, but if I see that they're on vacation, I can assume they've made other arrangements. So..."
He frowned back at the page.
"I don't know why anyone would delete that."
"Weird," I said. I flipped the file I was holding to the activity log and saw the exact same thing. "This one has a deleted vacation, too."
"Really?"
Thomas leaned over.
Okay, that's... He picked up another file, skimmed it in the blink of an eye, and narrowed his eyes. I'm going to text Charlie and see if it would be deleted for any reason. I pulled out another file and skimmed over it while Thomas texted. This one had 2 deleted entries in the activity log. The first one said, accidentally saved phone call information to the wrong account. And the second entry seemed to be that phone conversation. When he was done texting, I showed it to Thomas, who agreed that it looked like an honest mistake. Then we both found another one that had the vacation information deleted. This is really weird, Thomas said again, frowning at the files. He looked back and forth between 2 of them. Hang on. He started flipping rapidly through them in a flutter of pages, then stopped with a frown. These are really long vacations. How long? I asked. They're all... He flipped through them again, then held out a hand for the ones I had found. They're all at least 3 months, and some of them are as long as 6, he said after checking them. Those are long vacations. Yeah. His phone buzzed, and he pulled it out to read the text. Charlie says he can't think of any reason that information would be deleted, and it would, in fact, be quite inconvenient if it was. So, this is wrong. He glared at the files in his hands. This is all wrong. I don't know what you've managed to stumble across, but I have to admit, I'm a little freaked out about it. Me too, I said. We kept sorting quietly and uncovered a few more that looked like honest mistakes, and even more with deleted vacation information. I don't understand why these are being deleted, Thomas said in frustration. It just seems so innocuous, and it would be, if not for the fact there are so many of them, coupled with everything else you've been looking at, and... He trailed off and shook his head. It just doesn't make sense to delete this, and there's nothing else that seems to have been altered. It's like these people didn't want someone to know they were gone. But that's just like our group of people who are active, I said. It seems like they went missing and no one wants us to know. Thomas nodded, eyes narrowed. Except these people came back. So where the hell were they? What were they doing there? He flipped through the pages again and stopped in the accounting section. Hey. He flipped to the activity log again and then back to the accounting page. Thomas? I prompted. This guy didn't have a single credit card transaction in the entire 5 months that he was on vacation. How do you go anywhere for 5 months and not spend any money? I asked. I don't know, Thomas said. Is there a big cash withdrawal? I suggested. Maybe he was living on that. Not that I see. It looks like he spent a couple hundred at... He grumbled in annoyance as he tried to decipher the accounting information. I didn't blame him. There were only 4 columns. The first was a date, followed by the name of the vendor, most of which were somewhat cryptic-looking jumbles of letters, then how much they spent, and then a category. This one says that it was an online purchase, Thomas said. And I think this looks like it might be the name of a travel website. He spent a couple hundred there, right before he vanished. You think he bought plane tickets or a hotel room or something? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, and then his next transaction is just for a few bucks. It says restaurant as the category. Oh, you know what? I think this might be Miami International Airport. He flew into Miami and grabbed a bite to eat. And then he came back 5 months later and bought a couple $100 worth of groceries. But what did he do in Miami? I asked. Thomas shook his head. He didn't spend anything.
Could it be a magic who doesn't need any kind of food? I asked. He flipped back to the front page.
Wizard. He must have been buying food from somewhere.
I turned mine to the activity section and looked for the date that the person in my file had started her vacation, then to the accounting page. I've got a big gap like that too, I cried. This one made a small cash withdrawal, not enough for 3 months, and then her last one says travel. Oh! The jumble of letters suddenly made sense to me. It's a hotel. I looked up at Thomas slowly. In Miami. For a moment, we were both silent. I swallowed nervously.
I think we might be on to something,
he said softly. He grabbed the other files we already sorted through and flipped to the accounting pages.
Another big gap for the duration of the vacation. Then a travel charge. And this looks like maybe a taxi or something. Miami.
He gasped. He held it out for me to see.
MIA. That's Miami, isn't it?
I looked at the jumble of letters. I think so. I took one of the files from his pile and skimmed over the accounting section. Once again, there was a months-long spending gap, surrounded by several purchases in a row, very similar in price. They were each categorized as car maintenance. I realized that it was a series of stops at gas stations, then spotted a city name I recognized in Maryland. Hey, look at this. I held it out. This one is a gas station in Maryland. He pointed to the one above it.
That's in Pennsylvania,
he said confidently. And then this one. I pointed to the last transaction before the vacation and frowned at the jumble of letters. Thomas studied it for a moment.
Hear me out,
he said with a chuckle.
Overnight parking garage.
I think that's exactly it, I said. These people were all going to Miami.
Yeah.
He studied another file.
I can't figure this one out, though. I think it's another hotel in... It just says FTL.
Fort Lauderdale?
Yes,
he cried.
That's it.
I don't think that's too far from Miami, is it?
No, I don't think so.
We glanced nervously at each other, then each grabbed another file. Thomas flew through a couple more, setting both in the pile with the other suspicious ones. I was trying to decipher another accounting charge when he gasped.
Whoa, Grayson Turner.
Who? I asked. He held up a file.
He used to work at our mez office. He transferred to another, probably a decade ago.
He flipped through it a couple of times.
His vacation record was deleted, and he didn't spend any money for... Oh. Huh.
What? I pressed.
His vacation time was listed as 5 months, but based on his spending, he was only gone, and in Miami, for 2.
How strange. Is he the only one like that?
So far.
Since we found a new snag, I got up for a snack and a quick mental break. I wish this made more sense, I said to Rack as I sensed him following me.
Me too,
he agreed grimly. I had a feeling it was going to be another long night and helped myself to more coffee. When I returned to the living room, it seemed that Thomas had taken a break to stretch. We sat back down together, and I reached for another file.
Hang on,
Thomas said.
TS is up. He'll want the details.
I nodded and took a few moments to sip my coffee. Sure enough, TS was down in just a couple of minutes.
What's all this?
He asked as he entered the living room. Once again, I found myself explaining what John asked me to do. Like Thomas, T.S. listened with increasing alarm as I told him what we found so far. He picked up a couple of files and flipped through them, shaking his head.
"What do you think of this one?"
asked Thomas, holding one out. T.S. started to flip to the activity page, then stopped and went back to the front.
"Grayson Turner,"
he cried, looking up at Thomas. Thomas nodded and pointed out how Turner's vacation wasn't as long as expected, but everything else seemed to fit.
"Bloody hell."
T.S. studied the file more closely.
"Oh, looks like he's still a field agent. I could give him a call."
"A call?" I asked. He shrugged.
"I worked with him quite a bit when I was first starting out. I'm sure I could find something I'm working on that I could ask him about for advice or something. Then make a bit of small talk. Ask if he's taken a vacation recently. I won't pry, just to feel him out and see if I think he's holding something back." "Not a bad idea,"
Thomas said. He looked at me, and I nodded. "Thanks, T.S., I said.
"Of course. I'm actually going in a bit early anyway. I fell behind on paperwork after taking those days off and want to catch up."
I couldn't resist studying him, thinking of why he took the time off. Like Thomas, his veins looked like they were back to normal, but I still shivered remembering how strange it had looked. T.S. stretched and started upstairs.
"Going to take a shower and grab some lunch, unless you need a hand."
"I think we've got it," I said. Thomas and I hardly had a chance to start looking at our next files when he paused and looked toward the door.
"Mariana is here."
He set down his files and crossed his arms, looking at them with a frown, obviously disturbed by our findings. "Great," I said, jumping up to go greet her. I met her on the front porch and helped her carry in her stack of files as I filled her in on what we were uncovering. "Oh, that's freaky." She joined us at the coffee table. "I started going through mine this morning, and I found something weird, too. Have you seen any transactions for CVLR-BR? According to the category, it's a restaurant." "CVLR-BR?" I repeated. I flipped to the transaction page on the file I was holding. "No, I don't see it." "It would be the most recent transaction," Mariana said. Thomas skimmed a couple of his own files and shook his head.
"No, I don't have it either."
Mariana sighed. "So far, almost every single file I've looked at has that. The only ones without it don't look like they were altered by the same person. I think those might be genuine cases of someone lazy in IT." "The rest all have a transaction from the same place?" I asked. "They all have a transaction from the same place, and..." Mariana took a deep breath. "It's the very last transaction they ever make. Then they go missing, and then their files are all altered to show that they're not missing."
"Then they're all going missing from the same place,"
Thomas said. "That's what I think, and they're not spending much there," said Mariana, flipping open one of her files. "I think they're just buying a couple of drinks, maybe some dinner here and there. Then they never buy anything again, ever."
"That's certainly worth looking into," Thomas said. "Can you tell what CVLR is in accounting?"
"Next time I'm at work, I'll see what I can find out." She cleared her throat. "There's more." Thomas and I glanced at each other in concern. "What?" I asked. "They're all non-humans. Every single one." As she said it, a thought struck me. "Thomas," I began, "I don't think I've seen any non-humans in our list. Have you?" His eyes narrowed.
"No."
He grabbed the pile we'd already reviewed and started sifting through it at lightning speed, then dropped it with a thud, looking stunned.
Witches and wizards, all of them.
But does that mean these things are related? Targeting two groups? Mariana asked. Or completely separate?
I don't know, Thomas said. We'll just have to finish going over these and then start looking for similarities.
Thomas and I finished ours pretty quickly and started helping Mariana. Sure enough, most of her pile had their missing status changed to active, and every single one of them had indeed gone to whatever CVLR-BR was at their very last stop. When we finally had everything sorted, with a pathetically small pile of honest mistakes compared to whatever malicious edits were happening, we all sat back and sighed.
What now?
Thomas asked grimly. I think now we have to try and find commonalities, Mariana said. What's happening with these witches and wizards going to Miami for a few months is completely different than these people going missing and never coming back. What else can we look for? I asked. None of your group seems to have gone to Miami, and none of ours went to CVLR. Well, Mariana said, I guess we can read the activity logs and see if we find anything about the park or other commonalities.
That sounds reasonable,
Thomas said.
Might as well get going.
He shrugged and then stood.
Why don't I grab some pens and paper? If we start seeing something in the activities and notice a pattern, we can write it down.
Mariana and I agreed, and a moment later, he was back with a couple of pads of paper and some pens. We each grabbed a handful of files from Mariana's pile and got to work. A few minutes later, T.S. came back down and joined us for a little while. We went over our newest discoveries with him.
Okay, this is just getting more and more disturbing,
he said as he looked at some of the files Mariana brought with her.
And we can't find a single connection between the two groups, Thomas snarled. The only thing they have in common is what they don't have in common, which is what type of magic they are. None of the ones Mariana brought have had their vacations deleted, and none of ours have been to this CVLR place. Any idea what that is?
Not a clue, T.S. said as he looked at his phone.
It's getting close to when I was hoping to leave for work, he said. Although I don't know how I'm going to concentrate on a bunch of bloody paperwork while I'm thinking about this. Sorry,
Thomas offered.
I'll let you know if we find anything big.
All right,
sounds good.
T.S. stood and headed for the door.
See you all later then.
I picked up another file and started to go over it. Hey, I said, grasping at anything I could find. The activity here for the original missing report for this guy says that he was hanging around a weird vampire on a farm.
Interesting,
Thomas said.
Does it say where?
I double-checked it. No. How long has he been gone? Mariana asked. Looks like 4 years, I said, checking the date. That's about as far back as I found them happening, Mariana said.
Not 7?
Asked Thomas in surprise. No, I don't think any were as long ago as 7 years.
But that's when the park disappearances started, right?
Thomas said. We nodded.
So either they expanded to whatever this is, or...
He threw up his hands in frustration.
Or these are completely different.
I wrote down farm and weird vampire on my pad and went on to my next file. Once again, there was nothing in it that seemed at all similar to the others, aside from the credit card charge at the restaurant. I noticed that this one was the day before my birthday and chuckled at myself. I've got a suspect's name, Mariana announced. This one says that he was saying something about Reeves' new group 4 years ago as well.
Ooh, write that down,
Thomas said.
Mariana did. No sooner had she finished when Thomas said, "Hey, I've got a farm. Let me check the dates. 4 years ago. It says he's probably on that stupid farm. He usually goes there for a couple of weeks at a time and says it's a lot of fun. But this time he hasn't come back."
Could that be the vampire's farm? I asked.
Maybe.
I picked up another file and skimmed it. No mention of a farm or vampire, just a simple activity saying that this guy had been acting a little funny and then didn't come back. I wrote it down and went on. This is interesting, Mariana said. This guy's activity says, he told me he wasn't supposed to tell, but that he was involved in something big and wasn't sure when he'd be home, but probably not for a long time. Looks like he bought something at CVLR-BR on June 16th, 3 years ago, and nothing since. June 16th? I cried. Yeah.
That's the day before your birthday,
Thomas said, looking just uncertain enough to be cute. And I started sifting through my growing stack of reviewed files before giving up and handing them to Thomas. Can you find the June 16th transaction and see if it was 3 years ago? His eyes widened, and he took them and skimmed through 1,000,000 times faster than I could have.
Yes,
he announced. This one too, Mariana said, holding up a third.
I think we just found a connection, Thomas said. Let's go back. Everyone write down your CVLR dates.
Soon the three of us were flying through the files, scribbling dates and tally marks. I wasn't sure about them, but I had 4 years' worth of dates, all about 6 months apart. I leaned back as Mariana finished the final file. Wordlessly, we slid our pads to the middle of the coffee table. They were the same. Every 6 months for the last 4 years. Every single person in this stack of papers had visited CVLR-BR on one of the same dates and was presumably never seen again. Why are they going there on these dates? I said. What are they doing? Some kind of a meeting? Mariana suggested. Or a class?
Or the kidnapper just strikes once every 6 months,
Thomas said, not sounding like he was convinced by his theory. And all of them non-humans, I said. Thomas nodded and picked up his pad.
I got 2 mentions of a farm, and one of them specifically saying the missing person was hanging around with a vampire. 5 others saying that the missing person had some friend they didn't like.
Reeve is the only name I found, Mariana said. But I also got a couple vampires and a couple of farms. I nodded. Same. No names, but someone mentioned a vampire with a funny name and something about how this one guy started saying he was going to join an army.
Like the Legion?
Thomas said. I didn't get that impression, I said. It was something about how he's been talking about joining some stupid army with his friends who are bad influences. Oh, I got a couple of bad influences, Mariana said.
I saw that phrase too.
Thomas sighed.
This doesn't sound like the park.
No, it doesn't, Mariana agreed. But whatever it is, it's not good.
No.
Thomas drummed his fingers on his knee. His fingers stilled, and he looked toward the driveway. Who's here? I asked.
Sounds like Charlie's car, but he's at work.
Mariana was already pacing, so she veered into the entryway. "It's Ember and Danny," she announced.
"What's going on?"
Thomas said, as they joined us in the living room and sat down on the other couch. Ember's eyes were flaring with frustrated reds, and Danny's were churning with light blues and grays. He looked skeptically at our stacks of paper.
"I don't know about you," he said, "but we're finding some pretty fucked up stuff."
"Yeah," Ember agreed softly.
"I don't know if our findings are much better,"
Thomas said. "I thought you were at work," I said to Ember. She shrugged. "I couldn't stop thinking about this. It was a slow day, and I said I wanted to go home and work on getting the stable ready, and they let me." "When are you getting your horse from Arizona?" I asked, desperately wanting to change the subject to something happier, even briefly. "We're getting him soon, hopefully," she said eagerly. "Them? I thought it was just yours," said Mariana. "We're getting 3. Danny groaned.
"I swear, I am not going to get suckered into taking care of them."
"Are you getting one too?" Thomas laughed.
"No,"
Danny said.
"Char decided that horses are herd animals, so we need more than one. And if Ember is going to start riding again, then he wants to ride. And then his sister got wind of it, and since she doesn't have space—"
"I think you'd be a great rider," I said. Water elementals tended to pick things up easily.
"I can ride," Danny said. "I just don't enjoy it."
"You enjoy it," Ember teased. She turned to us and in an exaggerated whisper said, "He's just horrifically allergic to hay and is miserable for hours every time." We all laughed, maybe a little too hard. Then Ember heaved a sigh. "So, what do you guys find?" Once again, we went over our findings. Ember's eyes flared wildly, and Danny shook his head the entire time.
"The good news," Thomas finished, "is that we have one possible lead."
"What's that?" Danny asked.
"One of our wizards who took a mysterious vacation in Miami was Grayson Turner."
Several shades of blue rippled across Danny's eyes, and he arched an eyebrow.
"Grayson Turner? The guy we used to work with, Grayson Turner?"
Thomas nodded.
Danny said. "That's interesting." "I thought so," Thomas said. "TS is going to give him a call and just feel him out a little bit."
Danny nodded.
"Good. Maybe we'll get somewhere."
He waved an annoyed hand at the various stacks of papers scattered around.
"We haven't turned up anything better with all this crap. But one thing is for sure. Whoever altered these files was up to no good."
"But was it the same person?" asked Mariana. "Can we prove any of this is related?" I set down the file I was holding with a sigh. "John said the park is the priority," I reminded them. "If we can't connect these altered files to it, we have to put them aside." Ember groaned. "I know."
"So, what about you, Ember?" Thomas asked, "since you were actually looking at confirmed park incidents."
Ember sighed, and her eyes darkened and dimmed. "I couldn't find a single connection between any of them," she said in frustration. "Not a single dehydrated fucking one. None of them work in the same place except for 2, but according to my dad, they're in completely separate offices. None of them have any similar trends. The only similarities in their transactions are that some of them do seem like they went camping. Most of the interviews we have regarding the disappearances mention that they were going to the park." She sighed again and gestured to us. We don't have anything like yours where they all went to the same place or on the same day. They're all different types of magics, non-human and human alike. Slightly more of them go missing in the spring and summer, but that could easily be because the weather is nice. It honestly seems like these people were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The only other evidence I've been able to turn up is that some of them have been confirmed dead, but even that seems random.
Did they find bodies?
Mariana asked. No, said Ember. It's through pack bonds with werewolves and stuff. A week or so after they disappear, sometimes a little longer, a few of them have a wearer of some kind who has come forward to say they can sense that the missing person has died. But that's it. There was... She opened a notebook and flipped through it. There was one were-lion who died abruptly. His soul pride mate was one of the people missing. It's likely that he died when the soul pride mate did, but it's just a guess. But there was one really weird one where the wizard vanished, but his familiar didn't. Ember flipped a couple of pages and read silently for a moment. So, the familiar said that he couldn't sense his wizard for a while, like for a few days.
Couldn't sense him? Thomas asked in concern. Did he elaborate?
No, that's all it said. But then... Ember went on. The familiar contacted Mez and said that he could sense his wizard clearly again. According to the record, an agent was sent out, but by the time they got there, the familiar was dead. I looked across the room to the basket where I knew Rack was, and was met by a pair of yellow eyes and flattened, concerned ears. Was there any more to it than that? I asked. No, Ember said. It wasn't very well recorded. Thomas sighed.
Disturbing. I was really hoping you guys would have turned up something else to go on, Danny said.
Maybe we should switch piles, Mariana suggested. Get some fresh eyes and see if we notice any similarities in the batch we didn't look at.
Don't know what else to do,
Danny said grimly. He leaned forward and grabbed a file, then sat back and started looking it over. The five of us sat in silence for a while, slowly filtering through the other stacks. Nothing seemed to jump out at me as being the same, other than the fact that these people all went to the park. One thing is for sure, Mariana said. I jumped at the sudden sound. I don't think anyone who went to the park intended to disappear. I don't see any mentions of how they were acting strange or hanging around bad influences, like our group was. It seems like these people just went camping and never came back. I'm noticing that, too, Ember said. You guys have stuff that made it seem like all the people who went to CVLR knew that they were going to disappear somewhere, and I don't see any who have been reported as dead.
And all these witches and wizards obviously went willingly to Miami and then came back,
Danny said. A series of worried gray waves crashed across his eyes.
I hate to sound like some kind of a conspiracy theorist, but something is happening, and it's really starting to seem like 3 separate somethings.
I think you're right, said Thomas darkly. I think this is 3 separate things. I just can't see a connection between any of them except that they're all disappearing in some way.
Except the wizards aren't disappearing, Danny said. They're coming back.
Do you think, Mariana said hesitantly, it's SHA? I suppressed a shudder. SHA was an extremist group dedicated to the superiority of witches and wizards. They were the ones who had captured us and taken us to the facility.
I'm checking for that, Danny said, flipping open another file. But I haven't seen a single SHA tag. There's no way there are this many affiliates going undetected. I agree, Thomas said. I didn't see a single one either. I'm baffled. Danny tossed the remaining papers on the table. Thomas sighed. Yeah, all I have are more questions. He stood and started to set his handful of files down, then sucked in a sharp breath and dropped them. His shoulders visibly stiffened. Thomas? I asked in concern. His mouth opened like he was going to say something. Instead, he dropped to the floor. Thomas! I shrieked, throwing myself off the couch to his side. Danny was by my side in a flash. Tom. He gently patted Thomas on the cheek a couple of times. Tom, hey. I swallowed hard as Danny followed it up with a much harder smack. Thomas. Fuck. Is he? Mariana gasped. He's alive, I said. Thomas was obviously breathing, but it seemed strained. Do you think it was the blood magic? Ember said, flaring eyes turning to Danny as if she expected him to pass out next. No. Instead of elaborating, Danny pulled out his cell phone. His eyes churned and grayed as it rang. He cursed again, then made another call. Char. He spat the moment I heard Charlie answer. Something happened to Thomas. Find TS now. Ashes. Hang on. I heard Charlie cry. Danny clicked speaker and set the phone on the coffee table, then focused his attention back on Thomas. A telltale streak of blue rippled through his eyes, and I knew he was checking Thomas's blood pressure. I tried to think of how far it was from Charlie's office to TS's. Was TS even at his desk? Danny-o? Came Charlie's voice. Even though it was a single word, I knew before he continued. TS is unconscious. I got people on the way to help. What happened to Thomas? Nothing, Danny snarled. What? It wasn't Thomas. Hang on. Danny half turned and snapped his fingers at me. Call Shannon, now. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't that something had happened to Thomas. It was TS. More specifically, one of his soul pack mates. Rack rubbed gently against me and pulled me out of my panic. Hands shaking, I called Shannon. Had something happened to her? Hey, Jenny, Shannon said brightly after what seemed like 1,000 rings. What's up? She's okay, I cried. Even as my relief that my cousin was all right coursed through me, I knew what it meant. T.S. had a third soul packmate, one nobody talked about. She was a non-magic, which meant that someday... Danny let out a stream of curses, then grabbed his phone from the table. His eyes went so gray it made me shiver. Char, he said tensely. It's Delilah. Chapter 8. Ember. For the first time, I felt like I hated my job. I had wanted to work for Mez for as long as I could remember, and honestly couldn't say when the idea of becoming a hacker got into my head. I wondered when that was. Oh well. I was so close now. My 5-year internship was finally over. Just a few more years in IT, and I'd be able to officially start work as a hacker. Sometimes the job was boring and tedious, sometimes repetitive, but I never hated it. Today, though, it seemed so meaningless, unimportant. Soggy, tender-brained moron, I muttered to the sender of my latest complaint, fingers flying over my keyboard.
There's no floppy drive in your new computer because they're as obsolete as your dumb dehydrated ass. I barely remembered to double-check and make sure I hadn't actually cursed him out in the email before hitting send. Some of these older magics. I pulled up my internal chat window and typed one to my papa. E. Pelagos. Why do all you old guys keep your floppy disks? D. Pelagos. Because they make great coasters, frisbees, and maybe I need them. E. Pelagos. For what? D. Pelagos. Drinks and throwing. E. Pelagos. And needin' 'em? D. Pelagos. To access whatever I saved on them. E. Pelagos. You didn't back them up? D. Pelagos. Of course I did. On my zip drive. Wait, hey, who are you calling old? I rolled my eyes and checked my next ticket. This time, someone was having trouble getting her trackball to sync with her new computer. Oh my God, I groaned. Why did they have to push out new computers this month? I should have been reviewing those stupid park files. Not that they turned up anything. I had probably looked them over a dozen times now and couldn't find anything new. Where did I leave off anyway? Did I finish a pile? Was it in my room or out in the living room? Are you okay, Ember? Charlotte asked. She kicked the floor and rolled her chair from behind her desk over to mine. Can I help with anything? The log got a little backed up while you were off, but I'm happy to... I'm fine, I said shortly. You're friends with him, right? She asked. With Agent Connell? You can just call him T.S., I muttered. Yeah, I've known him pretty much my whole life. Charlotte nodded. I figured that's why you were off all week. I'm sorry about what happened. I offered her a weak smile, but noticed she was still eyeing me curiously. What did happen? She said hesitantly. I'm not really sure. Everyone is saying something about a non-magic woman or something. I sighed. Yeah, she's his soul packmate. I don't know what that is, Charlotte admitted. I suppressed another sigh. So not a conversation I wanted to have. Of course, it was better than troubleshooting trackball lady or floppy disk dude. Maybe not better. Different, anyway. Then again, Charlotte clearly needed a friend. Every once in a while, when she wasn't overthinking being a dampier, she was nice to be around. I thought maybe we could be friends. We were certainly going to be co-workers for the foreseeable future, and she was the only other IT girl. Do you know anything about wares? I asked. Charlotte shook her head. I know about shifting, but not whatever a packmate. Okay. I didn't even know where to start. So, wolves have packs, right? Like real non-magic wolves, I mean. Charlotte nodded. Werewolves have this magic bond they can form with people, like close friends and family. It's not anything too crazy. They just feel like there's a powerful loyalty to those people, and if someone in their pack dies, they just know. And that's what happened? No, I shook my head. If that happened, T.S. would probably take a day off or something. But Delilah, that's her name, she's in his soul pack. That's different. What is that?
It's a lot more powerful and a lot rarer. Soul pack bonds usually happen between a werewolf and someone they don't know very well when that person does something super, big. Charlotte looked confused by my not-so-great explanation. I decided that how T.S. and Delilah met probably wasn't a huge secret. So, T.S. was on a mez job, chasing another werewolf who was attacking people. He caught up with the guy and stopped him right before he could attack this non-magic girl who was out. I was told she was taking a shortcut home after a softball game. They were fighting, and T.S. was still sort of new at things, and it wasn't going well. Anyway, instead of freaking out, this non-magic grabbed a rock and hurled it, I guess she was a pitcher, at this guy's head, and stunned him long enough for T.S. to get the upper hand, and I shrugged.
And?
That's it. He soul pack bonded to her.
Just because...
I nodded. It happens that fast. I remembered how quickly he soul pack bonded with Shannon and sighed at how different the outcome was. Anyway, since she saw them shifted, her memory had to be erased. Charlotte made a face.
They're so strict.
It's to protect us, I said. She shrugged. Yeah, I guess so. So, then what? Couldn't he have gotten a permit? I nodded. Yeah, he could have applied for one, and they would have restored her memories, but it could have taken months, which would have been hard for her, and... See, the thing with soul pack bonds is that the werewolf senses everything. How they feel emotionally, what they feel physically, where they are.
Isn't that like familiars?
Yeah, exactly. And when a werewolf's soul pack mate dies... Her eyes widened, and I nodded, then went on. There's a chance the werewolf will, too. So T.S. didn't want a permit because he wanted to avoid contact with her as much as he could. It won't break the bond, but people think it increases the odds of surviving their death.
Jeez,
said Charlotte.
So, the other day...
Delilah was in a car accident, I said grimly.
Is she dead?
No, but I guess she's in a coma and things don't look good. I swallowed hard. T.S. is okay, I guess. He said he's always known it was coming, someday. Even then, I don't think he was totally ready.
If she dies instead of waking up...
I turned back to my computer, hoping she wouldn't notice I was trying not to cry. I raised a hand quickly, acting like I was brushing my hair behind one ear, but I was actually fanning away the steam part of a tear. Yeah, I said flatly. He might die too.
I heard he is back at work today?
He was, mainly to distract himself from the inevitable and, more depressingly, to wrap up some things and get all of his current projects lined up in case someone else had to take over. I didn't want to think about it, much less explain it. If T.S. died, Thomas probably would too. I'd hate to lose them both. I had never lost anyone, much less two people who I had grown up with. I was finally old enough we were becoming real friends. I wasn't just the little girl tagging along with them anymore. And I knew losing them would destroy Danny. I sniffed and fought back another tear. On the bright side, Charlotte hadn't noticed I was ready to cry. Otherwise, I assumed, she wouldn't have asked. I wished I could stop uncomfortable conversations in their tracks as well as Danny could.
I tried to think of what he did when I tried to pry too deep. Like you said, I took a deep breath and put on my best customer service voice. There are a lot of tickets backed up in the log. Let's get back to work. I couldn't tell if she was hurt I was ending the conversation or if she realized I was upset. At the moment, I didn't really care either way. Not that I could concentrate now. I thought again about the files stacked up somewhere at home. Oh, maybe I left some out in the shop. I snapped my fingers above my keyboard and sparks rained down. A couple caught on the notebook next to me, and I held my hand over it, letting it flare up a little. Ashes. I had my notes on the park files in there. I quickly closed my hand over the small flame and put it out. I opened it and checked to make sure I hadn't singed anything important. Nope. I sighed and sat back. What to do? The next ticket popped up. Someone was accessing an account, which locked it to other users, and didn't seem to be in the office today. I verified the agent was off, then went into the back end and force-closed the profile. Easy enough. While in the back end, I thought again of the altered files. What if the missing piece was in one that I somehow missed? I opened the report generator and put in all the criteria from before, followed by what I needed to find the ones that were different on the front end. Was there anything I was missing? Something else to filter by? Nothing. I decided to generate it anyway. Then I could have copies at work and another set at home. I sat back idly, trying to see how far I could flick a spark. I bounced several off a nearby wall before checking the status. Several different windows, including a spreadsheet with the names of every profile, popped up. I skimmed over the list of names, so familiar now, looking hopefully for new ones as it slowly populated. None of them stuck out. Nothing new. I sighed. Grayson Turner. Why did that one catch my eye? Oh, right. He was the agent T.S. was going to call the day. I swallowed hard. I wondered if T.S. ever called him. I suppose I could ask, but wasn't sure. Hey, do you remember calling some guy the day your soul pack mate was in a horrific accident? Would be welcome. Instead, I opened the file myself to see if T.S. was the last user. I was surprised to see that T.S. wasn't the last one in the file. In fact, nobody was. The last user input was blank. That wasn't right. I switched over to the back end and pulled up the log of everyone who accessed the account and gasped. I was the most recent person to access it. Before me was a deleted name, and then Tethys Connell. Both opened the file the day Delilah was in the accident, but based on the order in the log, the deleted user opened it after T.S. did. I quickly copied the information down into my notebook and closed the window. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to figure out what was next. Even more questions. And yet, I had gotten something else. One more piece of the puzzle. The report was finished, so I went back to the spreadsheet of names and kept scrolling, looking for, I don't know. I flicked the mouse a few times and accidentally zoomed out. Rolling my eyes at myself, I started to correct it when something in the status column stuck out. Active, 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 deceased. What? I whispered. This was either the CVLR or the Miami group. None of them were dead. I looked at the type column. Elemental, air. a non-human. That put him in the CVLR group. Were there more? I scrolled down, hardly daring to breathe, looking for more, and found one. Were-tiger. And then a third. Dampier. I double-checked. Just 3. 3 of the CVLR group were dead. Why? How? Nothing else in their files on the front end or back end seemed to have changed. The details of their missing status were still deleted, but instead of active, they were dead. Were they really dead? Had something happened? "What are you looking at?" Charlotte asked from behind me. "Nothing," I almost squeaked, minimizing everything. Smart, Ember. Really smooth there. I turned to give her an innocent smile. She looked skeptical and possibly hurt. "Just fooling around," I lied, letting the log get longer. "Oh." With one glance over her shoulder, she returned to her desk. As soon as I was clear, I wrote the names down in my notebook. I couldn't wait for the day to end. I tried to focus on work and slogged through a few more IT requests. I couldn't stop thinking about the potentially deceased people, struggling to figure out how it all fit together. I started packing up several minutes early, eager to get going. I turned off my computer, grabbed my notebook, and headed for the parking garage. I knew I'd be waiting there for ages, but couldn't help it. "Bye, Charlotte," I sang. "See you tomorrow," she said, still sitting at her desk. I poked my head into my manager's office. "I'm going home." He nodded and sort of waved, absorbed by whatever he was doing. I grinned. He was a pain in the ass when I first started there, but now that he knew I could handle things, he pretty much gave me free rein. I got off the elevator in the garage and headed for my dad's car, absorbed in my thoughts. The top was down, so I tossed my purse into the seat and started to climb in, not bothering to open the door. Just as I was about to swing my leg over, arms wrapped around me from behind and yanked me down. "Hey!" I started to laugh, then one hand roughly clamped over my mouth and the other closed around my throat. My laugh choked into a gasp as the person behind me began to squeeze. Oh, hell no. I focused, and a fire burst into life all around me. Someone had just gone after the wrong girl. My attacker didn't even flinch. Instead, he moved his hand and locked my neck in his elbow. Stars danced amid the flames, and I struggled to free myself. He was a fire elemental, too. The flames around us flared higher as I started to panic. I could feel my self-control slipping as I flailed frantically. And I knew that if I erupted, he was going to kill me. I couldn't lose control. That wasn't an option. Wasn't an option? Like a cold splash of sanity, I could hear Danny's voice. When threatened, fire elementals erupt and set shit on fire. It's your go-to. And usually pretty effective. But there are going to be times when fire isn't an option. It's what they'll expect. Maybe even what they want. You have to learn how to stay in control and do something unexpected. That's the best way to defend yourself. I took a deep breath. Well, tried to. I will not panic. I will not erupt. It was hard considering I couldn't breathe and my head was pounding, but I forced my hand up and fumbled on my attacker's face. He recoiled in surprise, loosening his arm just enough for me to suck in a breath through my nose. My thumb found his eye, and I jabbed and dug in as hard as I could. He cried out and twisted his head away. I had a little space and pulled to the side, then slammed my elbow into his stomach. He gasped, and I felt his grip weaken. I slipped out of his arm and shoved him away from me, then spun and kicked him with all my might square between his legs. The man didn't make a sound. He dropped to his knees, then doubled over in pain. For some reason, when people find out I'm a blacksmith, they always say, "Wow, you must be great at arm wrestling." Nope. Blacksmithing and arm wrestling are completely different motions. I'm pretty average at arm wrestling, but I can swing a hammer really damn hard. So I balled up my fist, raised my arm, and swung down as hard as I could into his head. He dropped and lay still. I backed away from him, trembling. Holy shit. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to collect my thoughts. I heaved a sigh and took a couple of nervous steps further away, terrified he'd get up again. For a few moments, I just stood there, staring at him. "Ember?" I shrieked and spun to face the speaker, fireballs flaring up in my palms. It was Agent Fletcher. He raised his hands in front of him. "Whoa, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. Are you okay?" he asked. That guy," I pointed. "He attacked me." Fletcher whipped out his wand and moved protectively in front of me. "Do you know him?" "No." "Did he hurt you?" I shook my head, knowing how close it had been. Fletcher gently put a hand on my arm, wincing a bit at the heat. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere where you can calm down." He tugged lightly, just enough to encourage me to follow. There was a rush of wind and Thomas skidded to a stop in front of us. "What happened?" he demanded. I pointed to the fire elemental still on the ground. "He grabbed me and I think he was trying to kill me." "Can you sedate him?" Fletcher asked. "I'll get Ember inside. She's pretty upset." He was answered by a voice, trembling with barely suppressed rage. "I'll take care of Ember." I flung myself away from the agent and crashed into my dad's arms. They tightened around me, and I buried my face in his shoulder. "Are you okay? What happened?" he asked, crackling softly in Sedaic. I told him and could sense his temperature rising as I did. When I was done, he hugged me tighter, then pushed me back so he could get a good look at my face. His eyes were dim with worry and hardly flickering at all. "Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded. "What happened?" gasped Mariana. To my surprise, several other people, including her and Jen, had joined us. Someone must have sounded the alarm. I wasn't sure I could bring myself to repeat the story, and was grateful when my dad did for me. Everyone listened grimly as he translated. "Glad I came a few minutes early," Thomas said darkly. "I'm sorry I wasn't here even sooner." "Seems like Ember took care of it quite nicely," came Danny's voice. I spun, scanning the small crowd frantically until I saw him. With one last quick squeeze, I released my dad and shoved my way through people to my other one. Danny hugged me just as tightly. "I almost erupted," I told him, wrapping my arms around him. "But I remembered what you taught me, and I took a deep breath. "Totally kicked his ass," he supplied. "Yeah." "You did a good job, Morumu." He hugged me again, then his voice turned cold.
Tom, let's get this bastard downstairs before I kill him. Or Char does.
Thomas hauled my still unconscious attacker up and onto his shoulder. Danny gave me one last hug, then he followed. Most of the crowd went with them.
Let's go home, little spark.
I nodded and followed my dad to the car, flanked by Mariana and Jen. Somewhere between Mez and home, I stopped shaking, and my temperature slowly returned to a nice, normal 102. Soon, I was settled in with a nice big sugar maple log and some of my best friends. I felt a lot more comfortable and was able to tell them everything that happened.
I can't believe you didn't freak out. I would have,
Mariana said.
It was close, I admitted. I'm just glad you're okay, said Shannon softly. She was sitting on the couch with Jen, across from me. Shannon was the first person I had ever known as a non-magic who was turned into a Dhampir. I always expected her to look different somehow than she had as a human, but she didn't. She was still a few inches taller than me and slender. I knew she had likely stopped aging shortly after being turned, but that wasn't anything unusual for a magic. Her brown eyes never missed a thing, which had nearly gotten us in trouble when she was a non-magic. And, like me, she was fond of bright, wild shades of nail polish, although she didn't need to stick to a special kind designed for fire elementals. Other than her nails, she pretty much looked exactly the way she did the day we met, aside from having swapped long braids for shorter, natural curls. At the moment, her hair was hidden under the scarf she wore to bed. She was still wearing pajama pants, too, which made me suspect she jumped out of bed and rushed right over here as soon as Jen told her what happened to me. I wouldn't have been surprised if she had a nightshirt on under her sweatshirt. We didn't see each other often, so I was touched she hurried over for me. I don't think anyone else needs to get hurt right now, Shannon continued.
We all solemnly nodded in agreement. After Delilah's car accident, Shannon had been asked to fly up. Since she was T.S.'s other soul pack mate, the hope was that Thomas's proximity, coupled with hers, would help somehow if Delilah died. Even though I wished it were under better circumstances, it was nice to have Shannon up for a while. We were still all being a little conservative when it came to hanging out with her, out of fear that someone would still trace her to Thomas. But now that it had been over 5 years, I think we were starting to feel pretty confident. For a brief moment, I entertained the idea that whoever was altering these files had good intentions. After all, changing Shannon into a Dhampir was punishable by death, so it wasn't as if our little group didn't have our own highly illegal secret. But I knew that wasn't going to be the case with this. Whatever this was, it wasn't masking saving someone's life. If there was one perk of Shannon being here, though, it was that she loved a good mystery and was pretty good at fitting the pieces together. Unfortunately, she was just as baffled as the rest of us with the data we turned up. I wondered if she'd be able to fit in my latest discoveries in a way that I hadn't been able to. I considered saying something, but I wanted to finish my log and take a few minutes to not think about anything work or park related. Everyone else seemed happy to let me take a break, and I was grateful that I wasn't being bombarded with questions. At last, I decided to do something to vent my anxiety. I stood and stretched.
I think I'm gonna go out to the shed.
My dad started to say something, then hesitated and changed it to, "Do you want some company?"
The concern in his eyes was a dead giveaway. He was worried about me being alone. I shivered. If I wasn't safe on our own property... Suddenly, being where I wouldn't be able to hear anyone approaching over the sound of hammering didn't seem like such a great idea after all. "Maybe I'll just bake," I said, thinking of another hobby that was a little less loud and a lot more indoors. For a few minutes, I almost forgot about everything. The attack, the mysterious files, even T.S.'s precarious situation. My dad made himself scarce, and soon it was just me and the girls in the kitchen, laughing and baking together. It seemed so normal, so fun. I made a bit more of a mess than I usually did, but I didn't really care. "Someone's here," Shannon said. We all looked out the window, and I saw 2 familiar cars driving in. I frowned and headed into the living room. "Hey, Uncle Charlie," I yelled. "Danny's back." "You told me last time I was here, you know," Shannon reminded me with a laugh. "All right," I giggled. Even though nearly a decade had passed since I learned my aunt had raised me as her daughter, I still sometimes caught myself thinking of my dad as my uncle. It was especially hard since we were still keeping it a secret, except from a handful of close friends. Originally, we were just waiting until I was 30 to tell my grandparents, who were the reason it all happened in the first place. But now, we were all sort of just waiting for the right moment. And so far, it had yet to come. Charlie came downstairs, eyes smoldering with suspicion. "They weren't gone for long. They're shifting over for hours." We waited in the living room, and soon Thomas, T.S., and Danny joined us. Danny slammed the door behind him and stomped in. The moment I noticed his eyes were black, I took an involuntary step back. Something had him on the edge of losing control. "What happened?" Charlie asked carefully. "He's dead," Thomas spat. "Who?" Thomas nodded toward me. "The guy who attacked Ember. He's dead." Everyone's eyes turned to Danny. It was touching, in a morbid, fucked up kind of way, that he loved me enough to typhoon and kill someone for hurting me. Elementals usually got a pass for that, but I wasn't sure what they'd do considering he killed someone in Mez custody. He noticed, of course, that we were all looking at him and let out a dark chuckle. I didn't do it. A new, horrible thought struck me, and I gasped. "I didn't hit him that hard, did I?" "No," Danny said quickly. "It wasn't you either." Thomas sat heavily on one of our couches. "He was given a truth potion, and he dropped dead." I wasn't the only one who cried, "What?" "We had to consult 3 different apothecaries," Danny grumbled. "But apparently there's a potion, an incredibly illegal potion, that doesn't do anything to you until you take a truth potion. It interacts with some common truth potion ingredient," Thomas explained, "and it kills you." T.S. sat down next to him. He had been pale and tired-looking all week, but he looked worse now. "Which means he didn't want anyone to know why he was after you." A shiver of fear ran through me. "But why me?" I demanded. T.S. shook his head. Danny sat down next to me and put an arm around my shoulders. "We're going to find out," he snarled. "Who was he?" asked Mariana. "Nobody special,"
Thomas said. He's got a few convictions and has been suspected of some... He cleared his throat. Anyway, looks like he'll do just about anything for the right price.
So, someone hired him to attack me?
Seems like it, said Danny grimly.
Why me? I asked again.
He shook his head.
Just because people do hire him doesn't mean he was hired this time, Shannon pointed out. Maybe it was just a random attack? He could have wanted a keycard to get into Mez, added Mariana.
I shook my head.
He was next to my car, and he was a fire elemental. I don't think that was a coincidence.
It was Charlie's car, Jen corrected. Maybe the guy was after him, but you got there first.
Or they wanted to hurt Charlie, but figured doing something to Ember would work too, said Shannon. But why would anyone be after him? I asked.
We all turned to look at my dad. He looked concerned, but confused.
Something you're doing at work, maybe? Shannon said. Someone you arrested?
Charlie frowned. I don't think so. I'm not a special agent. I don't get sent out that often. Most of my work is just with companies. We haven't had any large secrecy breaches in months. I don't have any new or problem companies right now, anyway. Nobody has a reason to take revenge on me.
Danny, then?
Shannon said. Danny hummed for a moment, then shook his head. I don't think being an agent is as exciting and full of, intrigue as you think it is. It's not like some mafia movie or something. Nobody is out seeking revenge against agents. He shrugged one shoulder. I don't even think I'm working on anything big enough to warrant hard feelings. The park, Thomas said softly. We all paused. Danny's eyes darkened as he considered it. Maybe, he said slowly. But it's been 2 weeks since the park. Not to mention we got our asses kicked there. And the investigation has been put on hold. What does going after me or my family do now? Why wait? And there were 4 of us there, T.S. pointed out. Why only target Danny? His words resonated with me, and suddenly, pieces all started to fall together. Danny wasn't the target. It wasn't about the park, but it was about an investigation. Had I looked in the front end? Yes, I had. Everything fit. Oh, my God. I swallowed hard and cleared my throat. I was the target, I said. He was after me. Chapter 9. Thomas.
I was his target,
Ember repeated.
but it wasn't about the park. It's about Miami.
Why do you say that? Daniel asked her.
I got kind of bored today at work, Ember said. Well, not bored, but I couldn't stop thinking about all the files we've been going over. So I ran the report of altered files again so I could have copies to look at while I was working, and it generated a list of names. T.S., did you ever call that guy?
Who?
The agent you used to work with, the one who went to Miami.
Tethys was confused for a moment. Then his eyes widened as I sensed understanding. Grayson Turner, he said. Yes, I did call him. He hung his head a bit. I had forgotten. I forgot too, I said softly. It was
A stab of sorrow went through him, so painful it made my stomach churn.
It was the same day.
Ember nodded solemnly. I know. She smiled weakly at him. Do you remember what you talked about? Tethys frowned as he thought. At last, he nodded.
Nothing much. I found a case, just some petty theft, nothing major, that involves multiple field offices, including Grayson's. In fact, he's dealt with the thief before. So I called and said I was working on it and wanted to know if he had tips.
He shrugged.
We chatted about it for a bit. Then I said it was nice to talk to him, asked how he's been, asked if he's done anything interesting recently, any trips. He said no. Didn't mention Miami, and I didn't want to pry. I wished him well, and that was it.
That shouldn't be enough to tip him off, Danio said. It didn't have to be, Ember said, because T.S. went into this guy's file.
I guess I did,
Tethys said. I know you did, Ember said, because I did too. I saw his name and was curious, but it didn't show you as the last user to access it. The field for the last user was blank. I frowned. That wasn't right.
Blank?
I echoed. Someone deleted it, Ember said. So I went into the back end to check. T.S. was in the file. Then someone else accessed it after he did, the same day. Whoever it was had their name deleted.
Can you recover that and find out who it was?
Danio asked. She shook her head. I'm afraid not. User access logs aren't considered critical, so there are no backups like there are for the activity logs. Once it's deleted... Ember sighed. But there was one more name in the log, the last person who accessed it.
Who?
I asked. Me. Ember's eyes flared. I wasn't thinking. I went in on the front end. I looked at a lot of files today, but that was the only one I opened on the front end. The only one I could have been tracked by. And then I was attacked. She took a deep breath. But I wasn't the only one.
What do you mean?
Charlie asked. Ember's eyes dimmed, and she looked sadly at Tethys. I don't think the car accident was an accident. I think someone was trying to kill Delilah because they were trying to kill you. Complete shock rocked Tethys and me. The room filled with a stunned silence. I could hardly even hear anyone breathing, just the sound of several hearts pounding and a gentle, almost unnoticeable rush of blood.
What?
I finally demanded, knowing Tethys was still trying to gather his thoughts. We both looked at that agent's profile, Ember said, and we were both, in a way, attacked just hours later.
It makes sense, said Danny grimly. If you take out an agent who is investigating something that you're trying to cover up, assuming you succeed, you pretty much guarantee someone is going to look closer at what he was working on. But nobody is going to connect a non-magic in a car accident to a case.
I don't want to believe it, Tethys said reluctantly.
But it does make sense.
For a moment, he felt absolutely, achingly miserable. Then it changed to something else, something determined.
It also means whoever is behind it is getting desperate. Danio's right. Nobody would have connected what happened to anything I was doing. But attacking Ember in the middle of the bloody mez garage was bold. She must be on to something. Did you find anything else, Ember?
She shook her head. I'm afraid not. Well, I did, but it's CVLR.
I think we need to explore it all, Tethys said. If we're wrong about the park and Miami and CVLR being 3 separate issues and they are actually related, then a single clue for one could be what finally ties it all together. And if they aren't connected, well, we still need to get to the bottom of them all. And I think Miami just made itself more important than the park, added Danny-O. I gave Jen a gentle squeeze on her leg, then went to go sit next to Tethys. I could tell he needed it. She smiled at me in understanding. I caught Shannon's eye as I passed, and she joined me. Tethys leaned gratefully against me after I sat down. My eyes drifted of their own accord to a pair of light brown spots on Shannon's neck, which stood out in stark contrast to the rest of her dark skin. Scars on magics were exceedingly rare, with one exception: a turning bite from a vampire. Even though I was finally embracing being a vampire, I still had trouble forgiving myself for turning Shannon. The fact she was obviously enjoying herself made it easier. And, of course, she'd be dead now if I hadn't. I remembered the pain Tethys felt when Shannon nearly died. Not just the shared physical pain, but the anguish of losing a soul pack mate. A few short years later, and here he was again, facing losing another. One that I couldn't turn. It had certainly crossed my mind. But unlike Shannon, Delilah was already registered as his soul pack mate, and Mez knew she was in critical condition. If she were turned now, it would be no secret who did it. I'd be executed, and Tethys would lose a soul pack mate either way, assuming he survived. What did you find, Ember?
I asked, pushing away the unpleasant thoughts. Like I said, I ran the report again. This time, there were 3 CVLR people whose status was updated to deceased. Everyone from CVLR was alive, Mariana said confidently.
Yeah, Danny-O said. They were.
Ember shrugged.
Well, now 3 aren't. Or at least they want us to think they're dead. Can you tell when it was updated?
Tethys asked. No, that's non-critical information again, and it was deleted. All I know is it had to be between when I ran the report last week and today.
Let's take a closer look,
Tethys said. We gathered up the printouts and sorted through them until we found the 3 CVLR people. Once again, our one clue turned up nothing. The 3 files were wholly unremarkable. They had nothing in common. Nor did they have anything that set them apart from the other CVLR files. Soon, we moved on to going through all the files again, trying desperately to see if there was anything we missed on the first 1,000 times through. Is anyone else getting hungry? Mariana asked at last. We had been at it for hours, and I didn't blame her. Tethys was starving. In fact...
Teth, when did you last eat?
I asked. He shrugged and muttered,
Dunno.
I sighed. We always knew that someday Delilah was going to die. It was a grim inevitability. I just never imagined it would end with a coma and long, agonizing days of waiting. I always kind of figured, hoped maybe, that it would be so fast neither of us knew it was coming until it was over. Like Hailey's. She wasn't in pain. She didn't linger. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone. and I was left with a gaping hole in my soul and my still human heart. Alive. Alive and with a vampire bearing down on me, a couple of helpless kids to save, and no time to even process her death, let alone mourn. On the other hand, I was grateful it was slow. Now that Tethys knew it was coming, he could be ready to block her out as much as he could. He was prepared. And maybe, just maybe, it would help. And with me and Shannon here with him, he might even have a chance. But that didn't make the agony of waiting any easier. My head had been pounding ever since the accident, and just sitting around knowing that any minute now could be it for Tethys, and probably for me, was torture. I couldn't even fathom how he was functioning, not with the added pressure of the intense devotion a werewolf had to feel for a soul packmate.
"Let's take a dinner break," I suggested. "And a mental one."
Nobody argued. The idea of helping with the move a little came up, and we ordered dinner, then started getting some of Danny and Charlie's boxes unpacked.
"You'll be getting your crap out of my basement now, right?"
I asked as I shelved books.
"Eventually,"
Danny-O said, smoothly giving the exact same answer he'd given for over 30 years.
"I'm going to bring it over here some night and leave it,"
I threatened.
That doesn't work for me."
I chuckled and tossed a book at him, just gently enough that he could catch it. Jen lugged another box of books over and dropped it near me. "Phew!" She laughed, then looked around and leaned in close. "Is T.S. okay?" I smiled weakly at her.
"Sort of."
"Are you?"
"Sort of."
She hugged me. I set the book I was holding on the nearby shelf and pulled her closer. For a few moments, we just stood there embracing. Danny-O came over with another box, and I expected a snarky comment, but none came. I opened my eyes. He was standing close by, watching us solemnly. His eyes, gray and barely rippling, met mine.
"Is there anything I can do?"
he whispered. I shook my head slightly. He sadly nodded once, then returned to shelving books. The food arrived and we all ate slowly, putting off the increasingly frustrating task of trying to find clues. "Is there a way we can run a report and see if anyone else has new changes in their files?" Mariana asked when she was done eating. "Not from here," Ember said. "We'd have to go through every profile one by one, compare 'em to last week's printouts, and just hope that anything that was changed is on the front end."
"How delightfully tedious,"
Danny-O snorted.
"Why don't we at least check the 3 deceased ones?"
said Tethys.
"Can't hurt."
Ember went to get her laptop, then settled in on the couch with it.
"Wait,"
Danny-O said, stopping Ember as she opened it.
"You can't go into their files. It'll put your name in. We don't need that happening again. I can do it. Let me get my laptop."
He started to stand. "No, you can't," Ember said. "You don't have access on your account. You can only see people registered to our field office."
"Trout. We can't let 'em scare us off. We'll protect her,"
Tethys said fiercely. Reluctantly, Danny agreed and Ember turned on her laptop. Danny sat down next to her. Curious, I went over and joined them. We waited as Ember pulled up the Mez database and logged in. She thumbed through her notebook and started to input a name. A little pop-up appeared in the corner, and she closed it with a quick tap.
"What was that?"
Danny-O asked. It wasn't porn, if that's what you're worried about, Ember teased.
Depends on what kind, he retorted. Are there girls involved? 'Cause if not...
Ew, Ember smacked him on the arm. I'm not telling my dad what kind of porn I watch.
Wait, what?
Charlie demanded from the other couch. It was just a notification, Ember cried. I didn't even read it. I just dismissed it. I chuckled and cut in to save her.
It said, desktop synchronization complete.
See? Ember said. Nothing important. She turned her attention to the database. So, this is the first guy who was listed as... She trailed off and turned to me, eyes flaring wildly. What did you say?
I didn't say anything.
No, the notification. What did you say it said?
Desktop synchronization complete.
That's not right. Ember sat back. I could feel heat emanating from her.
Mine syncs,
Danio said. Yeah, so does mine, Ember said. But I turn my desktop off when I leave work. I always turn it off. Maybe you forgot this time, Mariana said. No, Ember insisted. A flash of bright orange crossed her eyes. I always turn it off.
Hey, it's okay, Danio said. You've got a lot on your mind.
But what if I didn't forget? Ember demanded.
Then...
Danio shook his head. Ember looked around in frustration. Don't you see? That notification means my desktop is on right now. But if I didn't forget to turn it off, then someone else turned it back on. Someone could be using my computer at Mez right now. Danio's eyes quickly darkened.
I take it that's not normal in IT.
No.
Can you tell if someone is still using it?
I asked. Actually, Ember grinned. I can enable the screen share. It'll let me see everything happening on my desktop.
Can you do it without anyone noticing?
Tethys asked. Yes.
Do it,
Danio said. Ember clicked on something, and a bunch of icons popped up. She gasped and closed it just as quickly. Oh my God, she breathed. It's already running.
What?
Danio asked. She swallowed hard, staring wide-eyed at her laptop. The screen share is already on. Someone is at my desk at work, watching everything I'm doing here.
Right now?
Snarled Danio. Right now. Danio locked eyes with me. I nodded once. He stood and went swiftly up the stairs while I headed for the front door.
We're going to Mez,
I announced. Tethys started to stand.
Stay here with them.
Tom, he protested. Luckily, Shannon had my back. I'd feel a lot better if you'd stay here.
We won't be long,
Danio promised as he came back down the stairs, no doubt freshly armed. He joined me in the foyer.
Ember, keep on looking at profiles. Not any more on our list, just poke around. Maybe start adding them to a document. Make whoever is spying think you're doing something worth watching until Tom and I can get to Mez.
She nodded, and we turned to go.
Tom?
Tethys called. I turned to him, sensing how worried he was.
Please, be careful,
he begged.
I will.
Yeah, be careful, Jen echoed.
We're just going to the office, Danio said casually. It'll be fine.
But as we hurried down the driveway,
I could see his eyes were swirling furiously and nearly black. "I'll drive," I offered. He didn't argue, but slammed my door with a bit more force than necessary as he slid into the passenger seat. "You're not going to typhoon on me, are you?" I asked as I pulled out and onto the street. "No," he said tightly. "But you might have to hold me back if the bastard on Ember's computer is the one who tried to have her killed. If it's the same person who wanted Tethys dead, you're going to have to hold me back." He chuckled darkly. We both knew he couldn't possibly overpower me. "Guess somebody's going to die tonight." "Let's hope it's not one of us," I said dryly. He agreed. We were open around the clock, but nights at Mez were quiet. The majority of our work was done during the day, with just agents and minimal staff at night, usually made up of wares and vampires, mixed with magics who either wanted to work nights or were low enough in the ranks to not get a choice. I never minded the quieter nights and was grateful now. It made it easy to get to the IT department without being caught at work on our night off. Cautiously, we pushed open the door to the main room. It was a small room, packed with shared office equipment like copy machines, as well as spare computers, extra keyboards, ream after ream of paper and ink. The room also reeked of electronic heat and wires and various chemical smells. It made it hard to distinguish any suspicious scents. The sound of everything humming away made it tough to hear easily, too. The door to the manager's office was closed and dark. We tiptoed by and stopped at the door that led to the rest of the department. Danio reached for the doorknob just as a familiar scent hit my nose. My hand shot out, and I grabbed his wrist. "I smell blood," I whispered. "Fresh?" It wasn't fresh in a someone is still bleeding way, but it wasn't more than an hour or two old. "Fresh enough." He snapped out a knife, then reached carefully for the doorknob again. We poked our heads in. The larger room was surrounded by shelves of spare equipment, and the back wall was lined with server towers, humming away and further obstructing sound. 6 computer desks were pushed together in the middle, with short partitions between them. The lights were off, and while I could see perfectly, I could also see the glow from Ember's computer. If anyone was in her chair, they were obscured by the partition and desks. I gestured to Danio to go around the other way, then took full advantage of the speed and silence of a vampire. In a blink, I was across the room and behind the person sitting at Ember's desk. They were wearing a bulky sweatshirt with the hood up, making it impossible to identify them. The scent of fresh blood was overpowering and, admittedly, mouth-watering. Both of Ember's monitors were on. One was displaying the exact laptop screen I had been watching just minutes ago. As Danio requested, Ember seemed to be accessing a random profile. On the other monitor was a document which looked like it was a list of all the profiles Ember was opening, complete with details of which tabs she clicked. As I watched, the spy clicked a key and the words "screenshot taken" flashed. Then the person gasped and spun around in the chair to face me. I don't know which of us was more surprised. Agent Clarke! Charlotte? She smiled weakly at me and scooted her chair a little farther back. You startled me, she said. What do you need? What are you doing? I asked. Working? I thought you worked at the same time as Ember. Charlotte cleared her throat awkwardly.
We got kind of behind when she was off. I was asked to come in tonight.
Where is everyone else?
Gust is fixing something somewhere. She sounded uncertain, but honest about her co-workers' whereabouts. It's just us tonight.
Why are you using Ember's computer?
Her pulse, which had started to slow, sped up again. Oh, mine is updating. I figured Ember wouldn't mind. As she spoke, she slid her hand back toward her keyboard. A small throwing knife embedded itself in the desk, hardly an inch from her fingers, with a solid thunk. Charlotte shrieked and yanked her hand away. It drew my attention to a large takeout cup with the Aaron's logo. That was the source of the blood. Nobody was hurt. A Dampier was just feeding.
I think Ember minds you spying,
Danio said flatly. Obviously not wanting to take her eyes off me, Charlotte half turned toward him. Danio strode forward, casually flipping a second knife. Charlotte watched it go up and down a couple of times before speaking. Agent Pellicos, I'm, not spying?
Then you won't mind if I do this, right?
Danio kicked her chair, rolling it closer to me, and took her place at Ember's computer. He studied it for a moment before disconnecting it from Ember's laptop.
If you weren't spying, why were you taking notes on everything she was doing?
I wasn't.
Now you're lying to me and spying on my kid. Getting a bit close to 3 strikes here, isn't she, DiMaggio?
I bit back a smirk. He never missed a chance to use my middle name.
Want to tell us what you're really doing?
I asked. Charlotte shook her head. I'm just...
Allow me to rephrase that.
Danny hooked a foot under another chair and swung it around in front of him. He spun it, threw a leg over it, and plopped down, arms crossed over the back. He landed so close to Charlotte she pushed her own chair back in surprise. Somewhere in the middle of the chair theatrics, he swapped his knife for a stake. Charlotte noticed and let out a small squeak of alarm.
Did you hear about what happened to Ember in the parking garage?
He asked calmly. Charlotte nodded. Is she okay?
She's fine. He's dead.
Charlotte's eyes drifted to the stake, idly tapping against the back of the chair.
See, Danio continued, we think she was targeted because of something she was looking at in the database. And now here you are, looking at her computer. Guess what that makes you?
Charlotte frowned. I'm not sure.
It makes you our #1 suspect.
No, Charlotte cried. It wasn't me, I swear.
Then why are you taking notes on what she's doing?
I asked. It's... Charlotte swallowed hard, hearts audibly pounding. I can't.
It's either you or someone put you up to it, Danio said. Who was it?
Charlotte shook her head frantically. She was scared. It wasn't her. Danio reached the same conclusion.
Let me put it this way, he said. Whoever you're protecting wanted Ember dead because of something she saw in the database. That same someone wanted her attacker dead too, and then killed him. Do you honestly believe he doesn't want you dead now?
He said, she stammered.
If you're spying on Ember, then you've seen the same thing this guy is willing to kill to hide. And
You know who he is, don't you? But I'm sure you're special, Danio said with a shrug. I'm sure he won't kill you for the same reason. Charlotte sniffled softly and shook her head. Let's start small, I suggested. What are you doing? I gestured to the computer. Charlotte sighed. I'm seeing what profiles Ember is accessing and writing them down to give to... Why? Danio asked. I didn't ask. Danio leaned back in the chair. She's getting something out of it, he said confidently. He had a knack for picking up on that type of thing, so I wasn't at all surprised when Charlotte hung her head. You made a deal, I said. What are you getting? She wiped a tear away from her eye. A permit, so I can tell my sister about magic. Danio and I glanced at each other. You know you can just apply for those, right? He said. I did, but... She paused, trying to compose herself. He said that if I help him, he'll make sure that it's approved and rushed through so I can get her a permit right away. And he said if I don't help him... She broke off, crying. If you don't help him, what? I asked. Then he said he'll make sure the permit is denied, and he'll add some kind of a note so that I can't ever apply for a permit again. And once it's denied, I won't be allowed to see her. No, that's not how it works, I said gently. She sniffled a little and looked at me. Really? Have you already told her anything? I asked carefully. No, Charlotte said. No, I swear, but I want to. I have to get a permit. I couldn't resist thinking of Jen and her own somewhat similar situation. I was grateful that I had been able to explain the permit process to Jen, and that no one would ever have the chance to manipulate her into doing something out of fear of having a permit denied. A small stab of guilt went through me. Of course, Jen couldn't apply for a permit now. In a way, that made me even more determined to help Charlotte. And nobody can just deny a permit like that, I added. There's a process. Unless... Something about Danio's tone caught my attention. I looked at him questioningly. His knuckles were white around the stake, and his eyes were blackening. Unless that person is the one in charge of issuing permits. It was as if he had just gone ahead and driven the stake into me. No. Fletcher? I breathed in disbelief. Charlotte hung her head, and I knew. Please don't tell him I said anything, she begged. Please. You don't have to worry, I told her. We're going to take care of it. Danio swung off the chair and stretched. I think we need to go drop in on Fletcher. He's not here, Charlotte said. Where is he? She shook her head. I don't know. He told me that he had something to do. He would check back with me tomorrow after my shift, and he expected me to have something for him. Is there anything else you can tell us? I asked her. No, he didn't like questions, and I was afraid to ask more. What are we going to do with her? Danio asked in Japanese. We can't leave her here. Take her back with us, I suggested. We can keep an eye on her while we figure out what to do. That works. Come on, I said to Charlotte. Let's go. She followed me hesitantly as Danio set about deleting her document and turning off Ember's computer. Where are we going? Charlotte asked,
just before we left the IT department. "Am I being arrested?"
"No," I said. "We're taking you somewhere safe."
She looked a little uncertain. Danio caught up with us and loosely draped an arm around her shoulders.
"Come on, we're going back to my place. Ember's there. You two can hang out, get a bite to eat, order a pint of blood. Shannon's there too. You'll like Shannon,"
he continued, smoothly guiding her down the hall.
"She was changed into a Dhampir a few years ago. Oh, and you'll be safe from Fletcher there until we take care of him."
I chuckled at his uncanny ability to switch from intimidating agent to big brother figure as I followed them into the garage. Charlotte still looked a little uncertain, but came with us willingly. We drove home in an awkward silence. Everyone was waiting for us in the living room, and jaws dropped as we walked through the door with Charlotte. She looked around nervously and hung back in the foyer. "Charlotte?" Ember demanded. "What are you doing here?"
"That's a bit of a long story,"
said Danio.
"But we think we're finally on to something,"
I added. I hesitated and glanced over at Danio, not really sure how much I wanted to say in front of Charlotte.
"Hey, Shannon," he suggested. "Why don't you take Charlotte around and give her a tour?"
"Sure." Shannon jumped up and came over to introduce herself to Charlotte. "Come on," she said with a friendly smile. "Why don't you take a look around?" Charlotte followed nervously, and I smiled as Shannon began brightly chattering away. "Now, I've only been a Dhampir a few years myself," Shannon said as they walked up the stairs. "I don't know about you, but I still find all this magic stuff fascinating." "It's pretty cool," Charlotte said softly. "Well, in that case, you're absolutely going to love this house. You've never seen one like it, I promise." They vanished around the corner, and I turned back to the others, satisfied that Charlotte was in good hands and trusting Shannon would keep her busy. "Rack," Jen called. "Why don't you go with them?" Rack nodded. He stretched and started to run toward the stairs. Before he hit the bottom, he jumped, disappeared in a blink, and landed neatly at the top. Wisps of black smoke drifted lazily at the bottom and top of the staircase as Rack turned and trotted off after the Dhampirs. I flashed Jen a smile and a nod. If Charlotte tried anything, Rack would be able to let Jen know immediately. "So, what happened?" Amber demanded. "Who was on my computer? Why did you bring Charlotte back with you?" Everyone listened as we explained what we discovered in the IT department.
"Fletcher,"
Tethys said in shock when we were done, sitting heavily on the couch.
"I can't believe it. We've worked with him for years."
I nodded grimly.
"Do you really think he's the one responsible for the parking lot attack?"
Charlie asked, eyes red and flaming with rage.
Charlotte didn't seem to know, but I
trailed off as I remembered driving into the parking garage and seeing a panicked-looking Ember with Fletcher.
"Ember,"
I gasped.
"How long was Fletcher with you in the garage?"
I dunno. I never called for help."
"I did," Tethys said. "I could sense something was wrong."
He sensed it from me, but I wasn't upset until Ember told me she had been attacked.
"That means Fletcher was there first,"
I snarled.
"He was already with Ember when I got there. What was he saying to you?"
Ember frowned in thought. "I was pretty freaked out. I think he was telling me he was gonna take me somewhere to calm down." A fireball burst to life in Charlie's hand. I felt sick. What if I hadn't gotten there when I did? What if Charlie hadn't? Fletcher could have taken her. I jumped as a knife sailed by me with a whoosh and embedded itself in the far wall. I waited for Charlie to say something to Danio about the fresh paint, but instead he clenched his fist around the flame and put it out. "We need to find him. Tonight," Charlie spat. "Don't suppose we're lucky enough that he's home."
"I doubt it," I said. "Charlotte said he told her he had something to do tonight."
"What do you think he's up to?" Tethys asked. "Not just tonight, but in general, trying to kill us because we were looking into Turner."
"I wish I knew," I said. "Charlotte doesn't know much either, but he's obviously trying to protect Turner and all the other Miami witches and wizards."
"When did Fletcher start working with Mez?" Danio asked. "He must have known Turner, right?" "Yes," Tethys said after a moment. "Yes, they worked together. I think they were on the same shift for a while, before Turner transferred—" Wait. I sensed a sudden surge of inspiration. "Fletcher took a sabbatical a few years ago, didn't he? After—" A painful stab of grief ran through both of us.
"After his familiar died," I said softly. "Yeah."
I realized why he was asking.
"You don't think he went to Miami?"
"Can you check his profile, Ember?" Tethys asked. "Yeah," Ember said. "1 second." She started typing away, then paused and looked up at me. "My computer is disconnected now, right? And off?" "I took care of it," said Danio. She nodded and then quickly logged back into her Mez account. She pulled up Fletcher's profile and went straight to the activities log. "He did take a sabbatical from Mez. It was 4 years ago," Ember announced, "and it was 6 months long."
"Does it say where?"
Danio asked. She shook her head. "No, but it wasn't deleted. It's here on the front end. So that explains why he didn't come up in our altered files, assuming this is Miami."
"That means there could be more of them, too,"
I said grimly. She nodded. "Let me see if I can get his accounting information." She tapped away on her keyboard for a little longer. "Oh, ashes," she said. "I can't get his accounting information on the front end." "I can," Mariana said. "Can I log in?" "Yeah, sure." Ember passed her laptop to Mariana, who quickly logged into her own account. I walked behind the couch and leaned over, watching as she navigated through Fletcher's accounting information until she found his credit card records. She skipped back to 4 years ago and started reading through the dates.
"There," I said. "It's a 6-month gap."
"I see it. And right before it," Mariana pointed to a cash withdrawal. "That's enough for a plane ticket." I nodded.
"Although there's nothing that proves he was in Miami."
"Still, it looks pretty bad for Fletcher," Tethys said. "He's connected to it all."
"But what is it all?" I snarled. "What are they doing in Miami?"
"And where the bloody hell is he now?" added Tethys. "We have to stop him tonight, before he goes after Ember again. Or me, or skips town." Danio hummed and slung himself onto the couch.
"If I were a creepy-ass treacherous wizard,"
he began in a flawless impression of Fletcher, "where would I hide?" Ember grabbed a pile of files. "I'm gonna look through the Miami ones again. Maybe now that we know about Fletcher, we'll find something we missed." Jen reached for a pile, too. "What are these?" she asked, opening one. "Maybe Park, I think," Ember said. "Yeah." Jen started to close it, then stopped and jerked the page back up. "Whoa, no way." She picked up another and flipped through it. Then another. She opened a third, tossed it aside, and then opened another.
"Jen?"
I prompted. She held up a hand, then checked a few more files. We all watched curiously as she rapidly sorted them into 2 piles. I wanted to offer to help, but she clearly knew exactly what she was looking for. Instead, I watched until she had 1 large pile and 1 much smaller one. Jen took a deep breath, then lifted the bigger stack of files up. These are all maybe Park. People who were listed as missing without the Park being specifically mentioned, but either the person who reported it say they went camping or they had camping-related transactions. The initial reports were all signed off on by the same field agent.
Fletcher,
Tethys growled. I shot to Jen's side and quickly leafed through them. Sure enough, all of the vague reports about missing magics had been investigated by Fletcher.
This isn't coincidence,
I said slowly.
He's not just covering up Miami. He's involved in the Park, too.
Didn't he get hit by the blood magic, too? Mariana asked.
Yeah, but maybe there's a reason it didn't kill us,
Danio said.
Maybe he let it hit him.
I nodded in agreement. Who would suspect him when he was attacked, too?
Which means we were getting too close.
I didn't think much of it at the time, Tethys said slowly,
but he was quite firm about me waiting for backup before following the scent of that wood elemental. I told him I was worried we might lose it if it rained, but he said it was more important to be careful. He was hoping we'd lose the scent, I said. Forget going after Fletcher. As much as I'd love to rip out his bloody throat, snarled Tethys. Let's go back to the Park. We could waste all night looking for Fletcher and never find him, but we must have been on the right track in the Park. We can find whatever he was hiding and get enough evidence for John to take the whole damn operation down. With any luck, we'll be able to get Fletcher, too.
I agree, Danio said.
We're the only ones who have been hit with that blood magic. We were too close.
Let's go, I said. Ember stood.
Not you,
Danio said instantly.
You're staying here,
Charlie said at the same time. I'm not a kid anymore, Ember said angrily. Before they could argue, Tethys stepped in.
I'm the ranking senior field agent, so, technically, I'm in charge of this, he said loudly. I say who comes and who stays. Ember?
Danio and Charlie both started to protest as Ember grinned, until Tethys went on.
I'm sorry, you're staying.
But
it could be dangerous,
Tethys said. I'm not.
And if something happens to us, someone has to be here to alert Mez to what's happening,
Tethys continued.
You're more familiar with the files than the rest of us, and you have the database access and knowledge to recreate them. If we don't come back, it'll be up to you to prove something is going on in the Park, as well as this CVLR issue. I also don't want Shannon alone with Charlotte, just in case she is more than a pawn in this.
Okay, Ember said reluctantly. Mariana cleared her throat. I should stay, too, if there's no water.
I know you can take a damp here,
Danio said confidently. I nodded in agreement. Mariana had started taking some combat and self-defense classes at Mez, and Danio was giving her extra lessons. She could certainly hold her own against a dampier, especially with Ember and Shannon. In all honesty, I would have been happy if Jen stayed too, but I knew before she said anything she was coming. On the other hand, she had taken on a vampire alone, less than a month after learning her first spell, and she had only gotten better and better in the years since. She was a skilled witch. Sure enough, Jen stood, ready to go. I gave a token protest, but we both knew it was a lost battle, especially once we considered that if Rack stayed behind, then either group would have a way to know if something happened to the other. Soon, we were piled into the car, somberly heading for the park. Chapter 10. Jen. There was a time when I would have felt uncomfortable walking through the woods at night. Walking with night vision, armed with a wand, and accompanied by 4 other people, 4 trained agents, including a vampire, shouldn't have felt so unnerving. Yet, I felt like something would pop out from behind every tree or each shadow my night vision didn't penetrate. Nobody spoke. T.S. shifted and trotted along in wolf form, carefully sniffing as he went. Thomas stuck close to me, periodically sniffing as well and tilting his head to listen. Danny drew his gun the moment we stepped out of the car, and I didn't think I had ever heard him quiet for so long. I could feel the heat radiating from Charlie and was waiting for the leaves beneath his feet to catch fire. We trudged along in an eerie silence. As we got deeper into the woods, I swear even the sound of night birds and crickets had stopped. The trees parted as we entered a clearing. T.S. sat down and whined softly.
"It was here,"
he said. Sure enough, there was still a dark circle of burned grass, just like Thomas described.
"Everyone be careful," Thomas warned. "If you hear a strange sound, just move. Get away."
He turned to T.S.
"I don't smell anything unusual. Or anyone. You?" "No."
"It rained recently." Danny looked up toward the sky with a frown. "More is on the way." Charlie huddled into his sweatshirt in response and put one hand on his hood as if he was considering pulling it up.
"Where do we go from here?"
he asked.
"I went that way," Thomas pointed, "to find Danny-O. After we met back up, we came some of the way back here, then kept going."
Danny checked his compass tattoo. "That way." Thomas came over to me.
"Jen,"
he said softly,
"I know you want to help, but—"
"I'll be fine," I said. "It's a little too late to send me home anyway." Truthfully, I was a bit out of my element. I didn't have a fraction of the field experience a bunch of fully trained agents had. I didn't even have decades of experience simply living as a magic like them. But I did have more dangerous situations under my belt than Ember and Shannon. Mariana and I were a bit closer in terms of the number of times we'd been in life-or-death altercations, but I had a wand, and she didn't. Either way, this was where I needed to be. I may not have been that powerful, but I seemed to have a knack for getting out of trouble. I had almost lost Thomas and my other friends before, and I hated being stuck at home when the field agent alert went out, knowing that they were in danger once again. If an opportunity to actually fight with them came up, I was not going to sit at home waiting.
"You could always wait in the car," he suggested.
"First of all, I can't help you from the car. And second, we agreed that we need me here and Rack at home, so we all know if something is wrong. If I don't know you're in trouble, I can't signal Rack."
"I know,"
Thomas sighed. He moved closer and gently brushed a lock of my hair behind one of my ears.
"I just want you to be safe."
"I'll be with you." He chuckled softly.
"If anything happens, I love you."
"I love you too." Thomas leaned down and kissed me. I pulled him closer and kissed him back hard, just in case.
Or Charlie could wait in the car with you,
Danny suggested.
Charlie glared at him. I can take care of myself. You do realize I am an agent, too.
Yes, I just don't want you to. Danny cleared his throat.
That blood magic hit us out of nowhere. It's dangerous out here.
And you didn't stand a chance before, without me. That doesn't make me more inclined to leave you now. So, unless you're planning on waiting in the car with me, I'll be out here with you.
It's going to rain, too.
Danny-o. Charlie's eyes flared dangerously as he fixed Danny with a challenging glare. Danny's eyes darkened in response, and he squared his shoulders. He took a deep breath, and then a massive werewolf shouldered his way in between him and Charlie.
We're wasting time here,
T.S. growled.
We already went over this in the house, and we're all here now. It's too late to go back. Why don't you two just be like Jen and Tom, have a nice kiss, and admit that it's dangerous and everyone is worried about everyone else, and then let's go.
Danny sighed.
Fair enough. I'm sorry, C.
I know. I don't want you to get hurt either. I love you.
I love you too.
Just as T.S. suggested, they kissed. Thomas wrapped an arm around my shoulders and pulled me closer as they did. We don't even know if the car is safe anyway, I pointed out softly as it occurred to me. We could waste our time wandering around here all night while Fletcher or some other blood wizard is in the parking lot. We're safer together.
We could,
T.S. cried. He whirled and looked at me. The shocked expression on his large wolf face looked so human it was almost comical.
Jen, you're a bloody genius.
I am? I looked toward the others, who looked equally confused.
Something's been bothering me.
T.S. shook himself, then sat down.
It's too clear we were attacked with that blood magic because we were getting too close. But using blood magic is so extreme.
Guess we were really close, said Danny. T.S. shook his head, sending his ears flapping.
I'm not so sure. It doesn't make sense. Fletcher, or whoever actually used the blood magic, had to know we'd come back, or other agents would. It's that giant red flag that something is happening here. He's been so clever. Why would he do something that almost guarantees an investigation returning to this spot? But what if, just like Jen said, we waste our time wandering around here all night? What if that's what he wanted?
Danny groaned.
You weren't getting too close.
He looked at Thomas.
We were. The attack lured us away from where we were going.
Thomas hissed in response.
Damn it. He knew the blood magic would bring us right back here. Why would an investigation go anywhere else?
T.S. nodded.
Now that I think about it, he wasn't very keen on the idea of you following that other scent.
No,
Thomas agreed.
He wasn't, was he?
Still remember how to get there?
Danny asked. Thomas nodded. We changed directions, and soon the 5 of us were hiking deeper into the woods. My night vision spell wasn't wearing off yet, but I swear the woods seemed darker.
Smell anything?
Charlie whispered when Thomas slowed down suddenly.
Which?
He sniffed.
A different one.
And blood.
I smell it too,
T.S. said.
That way.
We all shared a nervous look. I adjusted my grip on my wand and followed.
How's Rack?
Thomas asked me softly. He seems fine. I could sense a lazy concentration, like he felt when he was watching TV. It was almost funny, imagining Rack curled up with Shannon while she watched a movie with Ember, Mariana, and Charlotte. How strange and normal all at the same time. I hoped it was right, and they were all peacefully getting along and safe back at the house.
The scent is getting stronger,
Thomas announced a few minutes later.
And fouler,
T.S. added.
And I bet it's coming from there,
Danny cried, pointing. There, through the trees, was a large tree with an honest-to-God doorway in the middle.
Be ready,
said Thomas. We slowly, silently crept closer. The bark of the huge tree was peeled away and blackened, leaving a perfect hole, just bigger than the average person. I could see a stairway inside that led down and curved away. After an exchange of nervous looks, we started down, one by one. Thomas went first, with Danny close behind, then me and Charlie, then T.S. bringing up the rear. I could hear his claws clacking on the ground as he padded down the steps. I glanced down and saw that the dirt steps had turned into stone. I wasn't sure how far down we were when Thomas stopped. I peered around him and Danny and saw that the small staircase opened into a much larger-looking room. Thomas cautiously headed the rest of the way down, and we followed. I bit back a gasp as I reached the bottom of the stairs. They opened into a large, almost circular cavern. Several huge pillars circled, holding up a rough stone ceiling. We were on a long, curved landing. The stairs picked up again, splitting into two stairways that followed the walls down and out of sight. We moved slowly to the edge and looked down. The entire room was visible and empty, except for a strange round platform at the bottom, right in the middle. Thomas nodded to T.S. and Danny, then started down the stairway to our right. He beckoned, and Charlie and I followed him. Danny and T.S. took the other stairs, mirroring us as we carefully made our way down. The air seemed oppressive and thick. The cool night air was gone. It was too hot, too stale, and something smelled awful. It reminded me of the time a mouse died in the wall of a house I rented in college, rotten and dead. It seemed to take forever to get to the bottom. At last, we made it and crossed the room to the platform. It came up to my waist and was covered in carved symbols and dark stains. "Blood," Charlie whispered as I reached the same conclusion. I turned to see that Thomas was covering his nose. He nodded, then removed his hand and sniffed. I swear he turned slightly green.
"From at least a dozen people, all kinds of magics, and it smells wrong."
He took another quick whiff.
"It's not like normal old blood."
I took a step closer, and my foot bumped against something, which made a metallic clanking sound. I moved away to look and saw a large chain, one end attached to the platform. The final link on the other end was hinged and open. There were two more just like it, attached in equal distance around the sides of the platform. A chill went up my spine as I realized what the platform was for. I knew without looking that there would be a fourth chain on the other side. My stomach churned, and I moved farther away. I thought of the stacks of files of missing people. How many of them had ended up here, chained to this platform and sacrificed?
"Okay,"
Thomas said suddenly, raising his voice. I almost jumped and turned to see he was looking up at the other stairway.
"Be careful."
He turned back to us.
There's a door up there.
I looked up, and sure enough, there was a now open door halfway up the stairs. Thomas pulled out his cell phone.
This is eerie. Let's get some evidence and get out of here.
Charlie and I nodded and took out our own phones. I snapped a few pictures, and then T.S. joined us.
Where's Danny?
Charlie asked.
What did you find?
Thomas said. T.S. sniffed at the platform, then snorted and shook himself.
It's a little storage room, full of potion ingredients and things like that. Danny's checking it out and taking some pictures.
He snorted again.
Bugger, his smell is even worse up close. Tell me about it,
Thomas muttered.
It reminds me of when that blood magic hit us in the woods. Did you smell it?
Yeah, said Thomas with a nod.
It's similar. Worse here, I think. Can you tell anything from the scent?
Thomas sniffed again, then shook his head.
No, I can hardly even tell what types of magics it's from. It's so rotten, it's overpowering everything. What about you, Charlie? See anything odd?
Charlie frowned and looked around the room. I knew without my night vision the room would be pitch black, and assumed Charlie was using his heat vision. Sure enough, I could see the telltale flicker in his eyes.
No,
he said after a moment.
Nothing seems out of place, temperature-wise. I think we've been here long enough,
Thomas said.
Come on.
We started walking toward the stairs when Thomas flung out his arms, holding Charlie and I back.
Someone's coming,
he gasped. We all looked around frantically. There was nowhere to go, unless we hid behind the platform, which couldn't possibly hide us all. And then it was too late. A figure appeared high up on the landing. He stopped in surprise, then laughed.
Well. I knew you'd find your way here sooner or later, but I am surprised to see you already.
T.S. growled, and Thomas moved protectively in front of me as Fletcher began to descend the stairs. He stopped halfway down and stood regarding us with a smirk.
But you don't seem so surprised to see me, Fletcher went on. I suppose you think you have it all figured out. Everything except why, Thomas said. Why, Morgan? How many people did you lure here and murder? Not as many as you may think, Fletcher said with a dark laugh.
Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Danny slip from the storage room and start making his way slowly up the stairs. Unless Fletcher looked across the room and up behind him, he'd never know Danny was there. I locked my eyes back on Fletcher, determined not to accidentally give him a reason to look.
Even one is too many,
T.S. said harshly.
Why?
Thomas repeated.
For power, Fletcher cried, raising his wand. Maybe if you were still a wizard, you'd understand. Then again, you always have pushed yourself, haven't you? The youngest agent in the office, always trying to prove yourself. All three of you. Not at the expense of innocent lives, Thomas said. Necessary sacrifices. And what about Amber? Charlie demanded. Was having her attacked necessary, too? Were you gonna bring her here and kill her, or just do it right there in the garage?
Fire flared up in his fists. Fletcher only laughed.
Little brat was sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Into Grayson Turner? What does he have to do with it? Thomas asked. I don't have to explain anything to you, Fletcher said.
He started to raise his wand. Danny silently mirrored him, raising his gun and taking aim.
And what about Delilah?
T.S. cried.
You owe me that much. She's my sole packmate. It wasn't an accident, was it? I apologize for that one, Fletcher said, not looking sorry at all. You were both supposed to die.
T.S. lunged and snapped furiously. Thomas grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and hauled him back.
You took quite a bit of time off from Mez 4 years ago,
Thomas said, keeping his grip on T.S.
Where did you go?
A tropical island, Fletcher sneered. Where else would I go?
Thomas released T.S., who shook himself off, then bared his teeth up at Fletcher.
Maybe you're becoming a blood wizard. Oh no, I've been a blood wizard for a long time.
A dark grin spread over Fletcher's face.
But you're right, I wasn't on a vacation. I was being inducted into the service of the disciples of Duinos, and
his grin widened, and I felt a chill.
My mistress has at last unlocked the secret of her great ancestors' power and will soon teach her most loyal followers. Then, a power you cannot begin to fathom will be mine.
I swallowed nervously. That didn't sound good. Behind him on the stairs, I could see Danny slowly closing in, obviously waiting in case Fletcher gave us more information.
But enough talk, Fletcher said. I have things to do, and you're in my way now.
You're outnumbered, Fletcher,
Thomas said. Fletcher smiled.
Then you've made 2 grave mistakes. The first is drastically underestimating the power of blood magic.
And the second?
Thomas asked when it became clear Fletcher was waiting.
I've worked with you for too long,
Fletcher said simply. He took a step forward and raised his wand. Thomas and T.S. tensed. Fire flared between Charlie's hands, and I lifted my own wand, ready with a defensive spell. Danny raised his gun, ready to fire.
Skal Esh Khan!
Fletcher started down the stairs, shouting a spell I had never heard. But as he finished, he spun and snapped his wand out behind him. Danny had to be just as shocked as the rest of us, but I still heard his gun go off as the spell hit him. The force of Fletcher's attack threw him backward into the wall, sending his gun clattering down the rocks somewhere. Then, to my horror, he crashed back to the 2 narrow stairs, scrambled desperately for a moment, then went over the edge. Screams, including my own, echoed around me as Danny fell. Thomas hurtled across the room, so fast I could hardly see him. He hit the far wall and used it to launch himself into the air. My knees nearly gave out in relief as Thomas caught Danny and landed safely. He paused a moment, giving Danny a chance to regain his balance, then hissed furiously at Fletcher. Fletcher had one hand pressed to his shoulder. He lowered it, and I spotted an unusually dark bloodstain spreading across his shirt.
You missed,
he sneered, even though Danny had obviously hit him. Danny wiped away a trickle of blood from his nose and smiled grimly.
So did you.
The sound of Fletcher's laughter filled the air.
I have to confess,
he said, slowly coming down the stairs.
I wasn't sure if you were there. I would have looked quite foolish wasting a spell. You are good at sneaking up on people, Pelagos, but Clark would never be here without you. Neither would Smith.
Both of them?
Fletcher laughed. Impossible. And you've pulled that same stunt on plenty of people working with me. Never expected you to try it against me.
He shrugged.
As I said, I've worked with you for too long. You should have fired the moment you had a clear shot. I guess you made 3 mistakes.
If you really have worked with us for too long, Danny said, then you'd realize you made a mistake leaving me standing. Fletcher's answering smile chilled me.
What makes you think I did leave you standing? Maybe I'm waiting for something.
We all glanced nervously at each other and around the room. Danny drew a knife with one hand and used the other to wipe away more blood from his nose. He flicked the blood away to the side, never taking his eyes off Fletcher.
"If you're stolen for backup," T.S. said, "forget it. It ends here, Fletcher. Tonight." "For you, maybe," Fletcher replied casually. "You're still underestimating what blood magic can do. It's just me, no backup. I'm just waiting for—"
He let the end of his sentence hang, and an oppressive silence settled over us. It was broken by a sudden cry of pain from Danny. He dropped his knife and staggered back a step, clutching his head.
"Danny-o!"
Thomas cried. "Dan!" Charlie yelled, rushing to his side.
"Ah, that," said Fletcher.
Danny collapsed. T.S. and I quickly hurried over. Charlie was kneeling by Danny, carefully patting his cheek. "Dan! Danny-o!" Danny looked completely unharmed. He could have been sleeping, if not for the steady trickle of blood still running from his nose. Was it my imagination, or was there even more? Heat blazed around me as Charlie climbed to his feet.
"What did you do to him?"
he screamed.
"Cool down, Smith," said Fletcher. "It won't be fatal, as long as he gets water. Quickly." He laughed cruelly. "Of course, I don't plan on letting you leave this place, so that may be difficult."
Whatever Charlie was about to say was cut off by a cough from Thomas. I turned just as he clamped a hand over his nose, eyes wide with horror as he stared at Danny. I followed his gaze and gasped. The black, swollen veins had spread across Danny's face again. A foul smell hit me, and I wanted to gag.
"It's turning black,"
T.S. cried. It took me a moment to realize he didn't mean Danny's veins. At first, it was hard to tell with the dark blue blood of a water elemental, but it quickly became obvious that the blood still dripping steadily from Danny's nose was turning black.
"You bastard!"
The air around me began to shimmer with extreme heat, and I realized in alarm that Charlie was erupting.
"Char, no!"
Thomas yelled, but he was too late. Charlie rushed toward Fletcher, almost totally obscured by flames.
"Skallengral!"
The harsh spell words, so different from the magic I was used to, echoed through the chamber, and Charlie flew backward with a cry. For several agonizing seconds, he writhed on the ground in pain, then lay still. My breath caught in horror as I watched the dark lines twisting and spreading across his skin, as if someone invisible was painting his veins with black ink. T.S. stalked toward Fletcher, growling furiously. Thomas gently pushed me back, closer to Danny, then planted himself between us and the blood wizard.
"How could ya?"
T.S. snarled viciously.
"We're your co-workers, your friends. What can possibly be worth this?" "Power, Connell," Fletcher laughed. "Unimaginable power." "Power you're willing to kill us for? Your friends?"
Thomas demanded.
"And countless innocent people?"
Fletcher smiled.
"You were my friends once, yes. But mark my words, there is no soul in this world so precious that I would not willingly sacrifice it in exchange for this power. None. Nor is there a limit to how many lives I will take to maintain this power."
I turned back to look at Danny, hoping desperately he would wake up. Nothing. Just as I started to look away, something caught my eye. I moved closer and knelt down to examine a tiny puddle of black blood near his head, wondering where it had come from. I eased a hand under his head and gently tried to turn it a bit, looking for a cut. My hand felt wet, and I pulled it away. There, I gasped. It wasn't just Danny's nose that was slowly, but relentlessly bleeding. "Thomas!" I cried. He turned, and his eyes locked onto the blood dripping from Danny's ear onto my hand. Thomas hissed furiously and advanced toward Fletcher. The blood wizard readied his wand. Thomas's shoulders tensed, and I knew he was about to attack. "Mar!" I cried, setting Fletcher's wand on fire. He flicked it almost casually and muttered, "Mar," effortlessly countering my flame. But it worked. Fletcher was distracted for a couple of seconds, and Thomas didn't hesitate to take advantage. He sprinted across the room and up the stairs. I held my breath as he reached Fletcher. To my shock, Fletcher hurled himself off the stairway before Thomas could tackle him. Fletcher hit the floor hard. He rolled onto his back with a groan. The distance was no problem for a vampire, and Thomas vaulted fearlessly up the stairs after him. As if in slow motion, Fletcher raised his wand above him. "No!" I screamed, lurching to my feet. "Skull and growl!" shouted Fletcher. Thomas slammed into the ground with a cry of pain, veins blackening and swelling with blood magic. "On," Fletcher said. I was quite familiar with the air spell, but helpless to stop it as he hurled Thomas across the room and slammed him into one of the massive stone pillars. "Skull din!" The strange combination of earth spell and what must have been the word for blood magic made the pillar explode. I watched in horror as the rocks tumbled down onto Thomas. The entire chamber seemed to shake and rattle. Tiny stones clattered down all around us. I threw myself over Danny and covered my head until it stopped. I heard T.S. yelp and wondered if it was from shared pain or falling rocks. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Fletcher began to laugh. I lifted my head warily. Fletcher had climbed back to his feet. "2 for the price of 1, he sneered. He aimed his wand at T.S., who was standing but looked unsteady. "This time I'll take care of you for sure. Skull and growl!" T.S. winced and waited, but nothing happened. Instead of looking alarmed or trying again, Fletcher shrugged, then waved his wand and cast another air spell, sending T.S. crashing into the rock pile. For a moment, I wondered why the blood magic spell hadn't worked, until I realized I was alone now. I stood, wand ready. Fletcher smiled at me and slowly limped closer. I wondered if an injured leg would slow him down at all. Probably not, considering the gunshot wound hadn't, and he had already stopped a vampire and a werewolf with both injuries. "You're brave for a young witch, aren't you?" he taunted. "Not even 30 yet, am I right?" I raised my wand slightly. "You're not going to get away with this." He laughed. "Let me guess. Your familiar is off with Smith's brat somewhere, isn't he? Ready to warn them if something happens. Pity that if he dies with you, he can't lead them here." "At least I have a familiar." I almost regretted the cruel taunt, even though I was trying to crack his calm. Fletcher smirked. "You think your familiar is such an asset. It's nothing more than a crutch, a weakness, waiting to be exploited." He slowly paced toward me. "Din!" I cried, trying to catch him by surprise and stun him. He knocked it aside easily with a shield spell and kept walking, chuckling. "You do have spirit. You'd make a good blood witch."
Never.
Of course you would, he said. I've been watching you. I see you in the practice room. I see you studying, always striving for more power.
I'm not trying to gain power, I protested. I learned magic late. I'm just trying to catch up with other witches my age.
You already have. And if you don't realize that, you're lying to yourself. Nobody your age practices like you do.
Because I'm behind, I insisted.
So, as soon as you catch up, you'll just stop?
I swallowed nervously. Of course, I wouldn't just stop practicing. But then, catching up wasn't really the only reason I worked so hard. I also want to learn more magic to protect the people I love, I said. Fletcher chuckled.
Worked out well for you today, didn't it?
My stomach twisted, and I clenched my fingers around my wand.
How many woods have you worked into your wand? He asked.
3, I said softly.
3? Before 30? And you say you haven't surpassed witches your age?
He purred. I knew the different types of woods in a wand didn't directly correlate to skill. I was just fortunate enough to know a wood elemental who was fond of me and gifted me the specially chosen wood. But it still bothered me.
See, Fletcher continued, you do want power, crave power, but you're limited. You've already learned all the spell words. That's it. Now you're constrained only by the magic you already know. And soon you'll stop improving dramatically. Maybe you already have. You'll creep along instead, improving only minutely. Unless you do something unconventional.
I'm not going to murder people for more magic, I cried. He moved even closer to me. I forced myself to keep my hand from shaking as I aimed my wand at him.
Think about it. You'd be a good blood witch.
I don't have to think. I trailed off and gulped as he came to a stop right in front of me.
If you ever change your mind, he said sweetly, find the mystic key and tell them Fletcher sent you.
He grabbed my hand so fast I didn't have time to pull away. He pressed something into my palm, then stepped back. Heart pounding, I opened my hand to look. For a moment, I thought it was a drop of blood. I realized it was a rock, or maybe a gem. It was the color of blood and shaped like a droplet or a tear. What is this? I whispered.
When you decide you want to learn blood magic, you'll find out, he teased.
A blood-curdling hiss rent the air, and a blur shot between me and Fletcher.
Get away from her,
Thomas snarled. Fletcher dodged away, and Thomas stopped, breathing hard. He was covered in dust from the rocks and bleeding from a dozen small places. Like Danny, his blood was black after being struck by the blood magic. Behind Fletcher, I spotted T.S. circling slowly. He was favoring a back leg, but obviously ready to attack. Fletcher raised his wand.
On!
I wasn't sure why he was using regular spells now, but it made me more confident in blocking it. I quickly cast an earth spell shield and breathed a sigh of relief as it worked.
It's over, Fletcher,
Thomas said. Fletcher's eyes flicked nervously behind me, and I glanced over my shoulder. My heart leapt as I saw Charlie slowly climbing to his feet. Fletcher actually looked nervous. But as worried as he looked, he still maintained a smile.
Oh, it's far from over, he said. It's just beginning. A new Arcanist is about to rise, but you will not live to see it. Din!
Instead of aiming his wand at us, he aimed it at the base of one of the pillars. It didn't explode dramatically like it had when combined with blood magic, but it still began to crumble, and in moments, the entire pillar was crashing down. I didn't hear Fletcher cast another spell, but saw the bottom of another pillar blown away.
"He's going to bring the whole thing down," Thomas yelled. "We've got to get out of here."
A huge rock crashed down from the ceiling, shaking everything. Dust was starting to obscure my vision and choke me. All I could hear was the sound of falling rocks. One of the pillars fell almost perfectly sideways, crashing down between us and Fletcher. Thomas grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the stairs. I started to run, then realized he wasn't with me. I turned, frantically squinting through the dust. A moment later, he was back, carrying Danny easily. Together, we raced to the stairs. T.S. was limping up them with Charlie. I couldn't tell which of them was holding the other up more. A large rock slammed into the stairs in front of us. The impact caused us to stagger as it smashed a part of the stairs away. Thomas jumped the gap without hesitating. I stopped nervously, gauging the distance. With some difficulty, Charlie climbed onto T.S., then held out a black-lined hand to me. "Come on." With no time to even ask T.S. if he could manage, I took it and joined him. I felt T.S. gather himself beneath us and lunge forward. I clutched his fur with both hands and shut my eyes. We rocked and lurched as he jumped. T.S. yelped and stumbled. I opened my eyes in time to see Thomas wince and grab his leg. And we were across. I quickly slid from T.S.'s back with Charlie, and we continued our desperate race up the stairs. I wrapped an arm around Charlie, who leaned gratefully on me for support. It felt like he was 1,000,000 degrees, but I ignored it. I would rather be burned a little than crushed. Together, we hurried up the stairs as the rocks continued to fall around us, and a deafening roar began. I think someone yelled to hurry, but I couldn't tell who. And then we were out. I stumbled out of the tree and onto the forest floor in a cloud of dust. I spun to look behind us. It sounded like an earthquake, and the ground was still shaking. Several of the trees were leaning. One suddenly crashed down with a rush of leaves. My eyes widened as I watched the ground heave beneath the pitching trees. "Move!" Thomas cried. We backed away, warily watching the doorway in the tree, in case Fletcher somehow made it out. In a mix of awe and horror, I stared as the ground collapsed. In a matter of minutes, it looked like a sinkhole had opened, swallowing up entire trees. Everything was still and silent. Even the tree with the doorway had fallen over, revealing the collapsed stairway. I didn't even realize it was raining until I tried to push my hair out of my eyes and noticed it was wet. Sure enough, a heavy, chilly rain was falling. I turned to make sure Charlie was okay and heaved a sigh of relief. He was hunched into his hoodie and looked dry, but more importantly, he was helping Danny sit up. "Whoa, what happened?" groaned Danny. I had just enough time to see that the bleeding had even affected one of his eyes. Instead of their normal blue-tinged white, the area around one iris was splotched with black. Then he closed them and tilted his face up to the rain. "Long story," Charlie sighed. "Are you okay?" "I will be." Now that the danger was over, I sagged against Thomas. He heaved a sigh and wrapped his arms around me. I felt T.S. bump up against us. We were safe. Chapter 11. Jen. "I'll talk to you soon. I'm glad you're safe. I love you, Jenny." "I love you too, Mom." I hung up with a sigh. At least one of my mothers knew what was happening. Granted, I only told Lynn an abbreviated version. I was still processing it all myself, but she still knew more than I could possibly tell Rachel. My eyes drifted to the piece of paper on the dining room table, blank except for the words, "Dear Rachel." I was even more at a loss for what to write to her now. I couldn't even fall back on my usual half-truths. Everyone is okay. Not true. Delilah was still in a coma, which meant T.S. and Thomas were still in danger. Work is going well. Also not true. I hadn't been back in 2 days and was honestly dreading it. Ember confirmed that Fletcher didn't have the right access to edit the back end of the database, which meant someone else at Mez was responsible. Add in Grayson Turner, who was still an agent, and the likelihood of more blood wizards working with us was too high to ignore. John met us not long after we escaped the cavern and went back with Thomas and T.S. They confirmed it was totally collapsed. Fletcher couldn't have gotten out, and no blood wizards were likely to easily get back in, and John set some wards to alert him if anyone started poking around. Even with Fletcher gone, we all knew it wasn't over. All we could do was hope we had found, and stopped, the source of the disappearances, at least for now. Still, Fletcher or no Fletcher, the prospect of returning to work was daunting. Tomorrow, once we were all rested and recovered, John wanted to meet to go over everything that happened in the cavern. Tonight, though, we were just going to relax. I sensed a rush of satisfaction from Rack as he caught a mouse in the field. I smiled a bit, then sighed again. I couldn't even be honest with Rachel that Rack was doing well, because she didn't know his real name. She had also taken to calling him Old Kitty. She wasn't wrong, he was almost 40, but I could never tell her that, either. I stood with a groan and headed into the living room. Thomas was just hanging up his phone.
"Hey,"
he said, flashing me a smile. His veins were still black, but they had thankfully receded and faded a little. Now the network of lines marring his skin were an eerie gray color instead.
"Was that Lynn? How is she?"
"She's good. Who were you talking to?"
"I was ordering dinner from Aaron's. Got you your favorite wings."
"Oh, yum." I spotted a stack of board games on the coffee table. "Are we doing game night?" I asked in surprise. Thomas shrugged.
"We couldn't decide if it would be weirder to do it or skip it, so figured we all needed a dose of normalcy."
"I agree."
"Perfect timing,"
he said, looking toward the door.
"Want to get the door?"
It couldn't be dinner already. Curious, I went to open it and was delighted to see Danny, Charlie, and Ember had just arrived. I rushed down the steps to greet them. I hadn't seen them since the park and was worried. "Hey," I called as I approached. Like Thomas, the marks on Charlie had faded to gray, but were still visible as they swirled over his skin. Danny's had faded too, although they were still concentrated on his head and face, as if that was the only place Fletcher had struck. "How are you?" I asked Danny, giving him a hug.
"I'm all right," he said casually. "It hasn't bled since last night, and I've been underwater for 2 days, although now I know why non-magics differentiate between headaches and migraines."
"It bled for that long? Is he okay?" I whispered to Ember as we all walked up to the house together.
"Yeah, he seems to be,"
she shuddered. "Blood magic is freaky." We were just settling into the living room when Mariana arrived to round out the group. Soon we were sitting around playing games, stopping only to grab the food when it arrived. Aside from the haunting reason why Shannon was there, it was wonderful to have her with us for a game night. For the first time since coming to New York, everyone, all of my magic friends, were together for games and food and fun. The last time we were all together for a night like this was when Shannon was still human, and I was paranoid someone was going to accidentally reveal we were magics. When I ignored the darkened veins on some of my friends and tried to forget about T.S.'s predicament, the night was perfect. We laughed and talked until it was late. Even Rack joined us for the games that didn't require holding a hand of cards. Eventually, we switched to a movie and popcorn. It seemed that recovering from blood magic took a lot of energy. Thomas, Charlie, and Danny all started yawning quite early into the movie. Shannon gladly volunteered her basement room, and Danny and Charlie went down to bed, after letting her grab a few things. T.S., who seemed to be sleeping more because of Delilah, was happy to go upstairs to bed when Thomas did. I stayed down to clean up, and when we were done, Ember and Mariana went up to the guest room, leaving me alone with Shannon. "Will you be okay on the couch?" I asked.
"Yeah, this is fine," she said, stretching out. "Going to keep me company, Rack?" she called. We both looked toward the basket on the hearth, and the tip of a black ear poked out.
"I might."
"How's Lynn?" Shannon asked.
"She's good. Still kind of weird to talk to her, though. I don't have to filter anything," I admitted. Shannon nodded.
"Did you finish your letter to Rachel?"
"I didn't start it." I sighed and sat heavily on the couch, mostly on her legs. I hate lying to her. I can't tell her anything." My cousin pursed her lips in a sympathetic smile. It wasn't the first time we talked about my struggles with talking to my stepmother.
"I'm sorry you can't apply for a permit."
"No way," I said quickly. "Don't you dare. I'd rather you be alive any day." She smiled again.
"I'm still sorry."
"You and Thomas," I said dryly, shaking my head. "You've been my best friend forever, and I would have hated not being able to get a permit for you most of all." It was true. As much as I wanted a permit for all of them, it was for different reasons. With Rachel, I mainly wanted a permit so that I didn't have to lie to her. If I could tell her the truth, she could understand what I was doing and why. Then she wouldn't have to worry about me and my future. And Emily was so much younger than me, it was hard sometimes to connect. It was difficult enough to come up with things to talk about without having to lie about half of them. Shannon, though, when I used to dream of getting a permit for Shannon, it was because she loved fantasy as much as I did. We devoured and traded dog-eared vampire romance novels for years. In college, we'd sit on speakerphone and read the same book for hours, periodically talking about it. As little girls, we pretended to be witches and werewolves and everything in between. I was so thankful I could share it with her now, even if I was still lying to Rachel and Emily. We sat in silence for a little while. Then Shannon spoke.
"What if you tell her the truth?"
I laughed bitterly. "Shannon, I can't."
"No."
She turned to me with a mischievous grin.
"Tell her the truth. You can tell her. Jenny, you're so focused on what you can't tell her, you don't think about everything you can."
"Like what?"
"Her favorite niece came to visit you."
Shannon gestured to herself.
"If I'm up here much longer, I'll have to tell my mom,
and then she'll probably tell Aunt Rachel," she warned. "But what else? You got put on a special project at work. We just had game night." She paused and considered. "And what about the bathroom?"
"The bathroom?"
"The bathroom remodel," Shannon cried. "Aunt Rachel is an interior designer, I'd like to remind you. Have you told her about the bathroom yet?"
My stunned expression was her answer. She playfully smacked me in the arm.
"Seriously? She'd be all over that. I bet she can even solve the tile argument."
"Shannon, that's brilliant." My heart leapt. "I'm going to go write that letter."
"Night," she laughed.
I hurried back into the dining room, feeling lighter than I had in ages. Soon, the words were flowing. I told Rachel all about Shannon coming up and staying with us, and the games, and my project at work, and all about the bathroom. I even mentioned how Charlotte, the other intern, had hit it off with Shannon, which was true. After we got back from the park and determined Charlotte was telling the truth, she went home, but not before exchanging contact info with Shannon. They were even planning to hang out a little before Shannon went back home. At last, I folded up the letter with a sigh, but this one was a sigh of relief and satisfaction. Shannon was up reading and waved goodnight to me as I headed upstairs, stopping to give Rack a scratch. Soon I was tucked into bed next to Thomas. It was chilly, so I focused on the warmth I sensed from Rack while waiting for my side of the bed to warm up. A moment later, Thomas rolled over and draped an arm around me. Tomorrow, we'd have to sit with John and revisit our harrowing experience in the cavern, and we'd have to figure out where to go from there. In a couple of days, I'd be back at work, looking over my shoulder and wondering who else was working with Fletcher. I thought of the strange stone tucked into my purse and shuddered. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, we were all safe, under the same roof even. Fletcher was gone. The cavern was destroyed. And maybe, if we were lucky, we had enough clues now to actually find some answers. "Good night, Thomas," I murmured sleepily. His arm tightened around me, and I quickly fell asleep. This has been Magic Betrayed, Rise of the Arcanist, Book 1, A More Than Magic serial, by Elizabeth Kirke. Read by Starla Huchton. Copyright 2020 by Elizabeth Kirke. Production copyright 2021 by Elizabeth Kirke.